Chapter 1. Shadow. The Blood Ring's underground operation was like walking into hell on Earth. Dark, disgusting and loaded with the metallic tang of blood in the air. I went into the depths of darkness willingly, because my cousin Sadie had asked for my help. And my aunt, Sadie's mom, had been held prisoner down in the underground for almost 20 years. 20 years. We'd only just learned she might still be alive. That fact was nothing short of a miracle. Bringing down those vampire leeches was worth anything to me, even if it meant my life. I followed Sadie and her bounty hunter team down the manhole, past the vampire bar I often frequented with my clients, then kept going. Past the point I'd ever gone, past the point of no return. We climbed down into yet another level of darkness. Then, after killing a vampire and breaking into the Blood Ring's guarded rooms, we stepped through the huge door designed to keep everyone out. I crept along the hallway like a rat, quiet and quick, and kept a lookout while Sadie and Vincent rushed forward, speaking in hushed tones to the women we'd come to save. Witches, who'd been kept down here by the vampires and hooked up to machines and tubes so they could be drained to within an inch of their lives, and then drained again. Over and over. Unwilling blood donors for the wealthy vampires' tastes. I rounded a corner, and the hallway opened into a chamber where there were 3 women. None in this chamber were my aunt. But then my attention snagged on one of the women. She was lying on a bed, strapped to a machine that was siphoning her magical blood from her veins. She was so pale she was practically the same color as the once white sheets, and even in the dim light of the room I could see the weakness in her body. The frailness in her muscles. How long had she been down here? And what had she endured? I could barely take my eyes off her. The pull toward the woman was so strong, so all-consuming. Sadie was untying the pregnant woman on the next bed. Vincent stepped over to my woman. I shuddered. My woman. Yes. She was my woman. My mate. No. I'm not meant to have a fated mate. My abomination of mixed genetics should never have created a person such as myself, let alone allowed fate to hand me a woman as precious as this one. Surely fate could not be so cruel to this poor damaged soul as to shackle her with me as her mate. I took a step closer, watching as Vincent withdrew the needle from her arm. I felt it again, an undeniable desire to grab her and hold her close. I would kill anyone who threatened to hurt her. My body trembled as I walked forward on unsteady legs, desire coursing through me. Every instinct in me was fighting the urge to snatch her from Vincent. My various shifters snarled and hissed. I could barely stand the buzz in my mind. But they were all in agreement about one thing. They wanted, no, they needed, the woman lying on the bed in front of me. She was dying a slow death, and if we didn't get her out of here and to medical help soon, she wouldn't make it. My mate was in danger of dying before she and I ever introduced ourselves. I'll take this one, I growled out once Vincent had detached the needles from her skin. I bent over her, and didn't hesitate as I lifted the woman into my arms. She moaned softly as I transferred her from the rancid bedding, and encouraged her to lean against my chest. The stench of waste filled my nostrils. I held my breath, my shifters flinching at the smells of the room. But when she turned her head and pressed closer to my shoulder, nuzzling in like a small kitten, a deep shudder of happiness pulsed through me. Damn it all. I was never meant to feel any of this. Tony and Travis. Take these 2 and go with Shadow. He knows the way to the hospital, Sadie said, and I nodded as I turned back toward the exit. I did know the way. Taking the injured women to the hospital had been my idea. And there was nothing, literally nothing, I wanted more than to get my mate out of here and secure medical help to ensure she could recover. The 2 beefy bounty hunters Sadie had brought with us picked up the other 2 women who had been on the draining machines in this room. One was extremely pregnant, and the sight of her belly made my heart pound and anger pulse through my gut. What sort of monster would do this to a helpless woman? Rape her until she was pregnant, then steal her baby for its blood. All the while draining her of vital blood too. Vampires? I held my mate tighter to my chest and clenched my teeth. Let's go. I forged forward back the way we'd come. Tony and Travis joined me, and we headed down the dark tunnel and through the iron door, making our way up toward the light. Ahead of us in the tunnel, 3 vampires suddenly loomed. "Oh damn," I said, slowing my steps and considering options. "What is it?" Travis asked, staring ahead. The 2 hunters wore night goggles to help them see in the dim light. My shifter genetics included both fox and hare, so my nocturnal vision made the need for goggles redundant. Vampires. The woman in my arms was barely conscious, and yet she whimpered when I lay her down near the wall, as if she couldn't bear to be parted from me. "I'll be right back," I whispered to her, then stepped back into the firing line. "You 2 stay with the women," I told Tony and Travis. "I've got these guys." 3 vampires were going to test my skills, probably to the point of breaking them. But no matter what happened to me, I'd never fought for anything more important than the mate a few feet away from me. I took a breath and clenched my fists, determination pulsing through me. They would not get to her. "Here," Travis said, pressing a gun into my hand. I lifted my arm and fired at them, relieved to see my aim was true for at least one of the vampires. The silver bullets hit the central vampire in the chest. I squeezed the trigger over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4. The other 2 vampires darted out of the way as the middle one went down, turning to ash. I threw the gun to the ground as the remaining vampires launched at me. I slid to the side, pulling my knives from the sheaths strapped to my thighs. I sliced through the air. A sharp bite sank into my lower leg. I slid out of the way of whatever that was. One of the vampires swung at me. I dodged, coming up under him to land a good jab into his throat. The other vampire leapt at me as I twisted, but he managed to wrap his arms around my chest from behind. He bore down. I cried out as my ribs broke, the bone-cracking pop sounding like death popcorn in my head. I threw back my head, hitting and dislodging the vampire, then took a swing at him with my silver knife. I scored a direct hit and he crumbled into ash behind me. I panted hard, sweat forming on my forehead. My leg was bleeding, and already infected from what I was pretty sure now was a vampire bite. I wouldn't die from that, I'd built up a pretty good tolerance to them, but it burned like hell. The 3rd vampire lunged at me and punched me in my already broken ribs. Excruciating pain rolled over me. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ribcage. The world around me swayed. The vampire slammed his fist into my head. I rocked to the side, stomach churning, and slumped forward. Maybe I wasn't going to win this fight after all. The vampire stepped in front of me. He opened his mouth and exposed his teeth, triumph in his feral eyes. Travis and Tony darted in from both sides. They grabbed the vampire, yanking him back. The vampire twisted and thrashed in their hold, but they tightened their grip on him. "Stab him!" Travis yelled. With effort, I pushed to my feet. I staggered forward and, using the last of my strength, slid my knife directly into the vampire's eye socket. He crumbled into ash. I stumbled backwards, my head swimming. "Thanks, guys," I panted, reaching for a lighter in my pocket. I flicked the lighter, a huge flame rising from the silver square I'd carried with me for over a decade. "You seriously stopping for a smoke?" Tony said. I chuckled, not surprised they couldn't see my injuries. "No. I need to cauterize the bleeding from my leg, or I'm not gonna make it." There was deathly silence as I held a silver dagger to the flame, got it red hot, then took a deep breath. I'd used a lot of mental tricks over the years to deal with the chronic pain my birth condition gave me. But this was going to sting like a mother. "Want me to do it?" Travis asked, walking over. "No. Maybe it would be easier if he did it." Travis read my hesitation correctly, took the blade, squatted down and pressed the blazing hot metal against my leg. I swallowed the scream that rose and clenched down on my jaw, while swimming through the levels of consciousness. I refused to pass out. 1, 2, 3. Travis pulled the blade away and stood. And I thought the stories about you were exaggerated. He chuckled before patting my shoulder. You're the toughest bastard I've ever met. Thanks, I managed to say, the pain beginning to recede. I reached down and touched my leg, and my broken ribs reminded me of why that wasn't a good idea. At least the bleeding had stopped. I tried to take another breath. Shit. Small slow breaths. One foot in front of the other. We've got to get out of here before any more come. Tony rushed to pick up his witch. I limped over to my mate, but Travis bent over, picked her up and deposited her into my arms. I opened my mouth to thank him, but he was already picking up his witch. You're right. We better go. I nodded, sealing my pain barriers into place inside my mind. This was going to hurt, but once out in the fresh air, I'd feel better. No matter what. Okay. Let's go. My mate put a hand on my neck, and that small warmth and attempt at comfort made the walk to the first ladder almost bearable. Back up the ladders, I said, as I stood at the bottom of the entrance and glanced up. We're gonna have to work together to get them all up safely. Travis nodded as he hoisted his very pregnant witch up his chest. I'll need help. I didn't want to hand my mate off to either one of the shifters again, but for her safety, it would be smarter to have them help. I'll climb up first and lift the women through the hole. You sure you're all right to do that? Travis said, nodding at my chest. You took quite a beating before. I shrugged, ignoring the screaming from my broken ribs and the blood soaking my clothes. Pain and I are old friends. I can do it. Tony walked closer. Do you want me to pass her up to you? I gripped my mate tighter in my arms. Putting her in a fireman's carry, then hoisting her up through the hole probably wasn't the best option for her. Ah yeah. But can you hold yours as well? I can stand a little, my mate whispered, my wolf shifter senses keen enough to hear her. I glanced down. Are you sure? She nodded. As long as I can lean on him. I didn't like that idea. What if she fell? No. If you're strong enough for that, I can carry you over my shoulder, and you can crawl through the hole when we reach the top. Okay? She nodded. I can do that. Her voice was sweet, but so broken it made my heart ache. Let's go then, beautiful. I gently maneuvered her over my shoulder, which would free up my hands to climb the ladder. A loud bang sounded from the direction we'd come. I turned toward it, staring into the darkness. Should we go back and help? I asked, speaking my thoughts aloud. Travis grunted, shifting his witch. We can. But we'll have to leave these women here. The three women began to sob. Including my mate. That settled things. Sadie and her mates would have to look after themselves now. I turned toward the ladder. They're on their own. The goal was to rescue these women, and we're doing that. Let's get going. I resettled my thin, fragile mate over my shoulder and began to climb, one hand at a time, dragging my bad leg up each iron rung. Pain splintered through my back and I clenched my jaw, refusing to let the agony win. I'd taken some hits, sure, but nothing that wouldn't heal. I reached for some of my limited magic, and found only a tendril curled inside me. I focused on the warlock within me, and pushed the healing magic through my body, soothing some of the breaks and hoping the internal bleeding would stop, or at least slow down. My breathing became a little easier, and the sharp edge to the pain dulled. Then the magic was gone, depleted. I had nothing else left to give. I reached for the next rung and pushed up with my good leg. 3 more to go. I hauled my mate, whose name I didn't even know, up the final rung, until my head was through the hole. My lungs strained as I heaved in a breath. Can you get onto the floor? I asked as I climbed up the final step. She rolled to the side, landing beside the manhole and curling up into a ball. I groaned as I surfaced through and sat down on the concrete floor, breathing hard. I would have been seeing stars if the small amount of magic I'd used hadn't reduced the pain to a reasonable level. Bring her up, I called to Travis, who held the pregnant woman. I dragged my legs up through the hole, so I would be able to reach down and pull her up. My broken ribs would hate me for what I was about to do, but I would deal with that tomorrow. For now, I had people to protect. "Are you okay?" I asked my mate, then shook my head. "I'm sorry." That is the most ridiculous question. She unfurled like a flower in the sunshine, then wiggled around so that she was still lying down but was no longer in the fetal position. "I'm Katie." My mate had a name. I smiled despite the pain that rolled through me. "Nice to meet you, Katie. Thank you for saving us. I don't know your name." "Everyone calls me Shadow." That's not your name." I opened my mouth, but I wasn't sure what to say. I never used my real name. Ever. Travis hauled himself up the ladder, one rung at a time, barely holding his witch since he needed 2 arms to climb. She clung to his neck while he tried to hold her in place with his elbows. "Just a little bit more," I called, as I reached down to grab onto her. She extended her thin arms up to me, and I grabbed a hold and pulled her up as gently as I could. She weighed less than Katie but looked 9 months pregnant. That could not be a good sign for mother or child. Travis groaned and came up through the hole after her. "I'll help Tony," he said to me as I wheezed through the pain in my lungs. "You want to start moving?" I nodded and pushed myself to a stand. "Yeah, I can do that. I'll carry Katie to the entry point, then we can all climb out together." I picked up my mate once more, and the pain began to ease. Was she working a spell on me? She was a witch, after all. Or was it simply the feeling of holding her against my body that was working its own magic? I limped past the vampire bar, sticking to the shadows as Katie buried her head in my neck and trembled. "Don't worry," I whispered to her as we grew closer to the final ladder. "No one's going to hurt you now. And no one would. Ever again. I'd make sure of it." We reached the entrance point and I leaned against the ladder, closing my eyes as exhaustion washed over me. "We'll wait here for Tony and Travis. They won't be long." "Thank you for saving us," Katie whispered. I pulled her tighter against me. "I'm sorry it took us so long to find you." I had so many questions I wanted to ask her about how long she'd been down there and what she'd been through, but now wasn't the time. If she really was the mate I believed her to be, in the long term I would find out everything, and hopefully I would be able to help her heal. The sound of footsteps met my ears, and I straightened up to better see the people who approached us. It was Tony and Travis, carrying their witches. "You okay?" Travis asked me. "You want me to take the lead?" I shook my head. "I'm fine. This is the easy bit now. We just need to get up into the sunlight, where most vampires don't dare to tread, then make our way to the hospital. It's about 3 blocks down." "You don't think we're gonna be spotted?" Tony asked. "The 3 of us are carrying women covered in dirt and blood." I grunted as I lifted Katie against me. "There's no choice. We have to risk it, and we need to move fast because once the vampire fathers find out what we've done, they'll be after us." Katie moaned and quivered in my arms. I straightened. "No more talk. Just follow me." Somehow, I managed to get up the final ladder and into the sunlight, hauling my emaciated mate through the hole. She gasped and rolled onto her belly the moment we surfaced, shielding her face from the light with her hands. Shit. I'd forgotten about the fact that Katie probably hadn't been in natural sunlight for a very long time. I stood over her, in the direction of the light, creating some shade. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Help the others." "I'll be fine." I got to work lifting the other women up through the hole, and then as an unlikely group of 6, we hauled ass through the city. We made our way past a throng of people who stared openly at us. At least they didn't try to stop our progress. "Not long now," I whispered to Katie, whose face I could barely make out under the layers of blood and grime. She clung tight to me as I carried her through the crowds to the only hospital in the city the vampires didn't own. It was run by warlocks, who were the most hunted species in the city. Chapter 2. Shadow. So you'll help me, Shadow? Sadie had asked only a few days ago. I'd looked her straight in the eye. To find the people responsible for your father's death. And have the chance to maybe rescue your mom. She'd nodded. Yes. I want to kill the ones responsible, and if they're part of a corporation, take them down too. Are you interested? I'd grinned. Absolutely. Now look where that fateful conversation with my cousin had gotten us. Sadie and her 3 mates were fighting for their lives somewhere down there in the underground, and thanks to her inviting me on this do-or-die mission, I was running, well limping, through the streets with my newly found mate in my arms. I shook my head. Who would have thought it? Sadie had 3 strong paranormal mates. A wolf, a dragon, and a vampire. Who'd have thought that would be possible? Not that she'd had a choice about it. Fate had decided for them. Fate was a fickle bitch. Probably why I was still single. Or had been until now. What had the gods been drinking the day they decided I, with all my screwed up hodgepodge of genes, should have a mate as beautiful as the one I held in my arms? In here, I said as we ducked down an alley that had magical wards engraved into every door and brick. Travis and Tony faltered but then followed me. The wards kept vampires out and could detect ill intent. I was happy to see the 2 bounty hunters pass the tests of the warlock who'd set up the wards. I stopped and turned when we came up against a steel door, with a shimmer of magic passing over the handle. Where are we? Katie asked. I can feel familiar magic. Somewhere safe for you. I pressed my hand to the metal panel in the wall. The door slid open and a man I knew well stood on the other side. He'd put me on my ass in several scuffles, and patched me up when I'd been close to death. I owed him. Nathaniel, I said, black spots forming at the edges of my vision. Now that we were nearly done with our mission, I was about ready to keel over. I gritted my teeth to concentrate on staying with it. There'd be time later to fall apart from the pain. Shadow. Who have you got there? Nathaniel sounded as if he were discussing the weather. He wore a pristine long purple jacket and black leather pants that made him look like a magician. I cocked my head at him and groaned. I didn't really have time to explain before I passed out, but Nathaniel was one of the most powerful warlocks in the state, and could kill us all with a flick of his hand. I had to find the energy to speak, or we weren't getting the help we needed. I drew a deep breath, ignoring the warning beats of my heart, and squinted at him. Tony and Travis are bounty hunters. They worked for Jack, now they do the same for Sadie. We rescued these witches from the underground, and they all need medical care. Nathaniel's perfect face didn't even flinch, but his eyes widened ever so slightly. I'd surprised him. That was a first. He stepped back and waved his hand theatrically. Then you better bring them all inside before the vampires smell you. He wrinkled his nose as though disgusted. You all reek of the sewer. Well, guess where they were hiding them? I asked, stumbling forward, my vision beginning to fade. I swayed on my feet. Nathaniel. You need to take her. I'm going to. My eyes slid shut, and I clamped down on the last reserves of energy as Katie's weight was lifted from my arms, before I slid into the beckoning oblivion. Katie. I didn't want to leave Shadow's arms, but when his eyes closed, I reached out for the nearby warlock. He lifted me just as Shadow crumpled to the floor. Oh no, I whispered. I hadn't meant to whisper. I wanted to shout, but I literally couldn't. I coughed to try and clear my throat. I hated how weak and soft I sounded. I wasn't weak. I wasn't soft. But I hadn't spoken in too long. The women down there with me didn't want to talk. We barely had enough energy to stay awake, let alone chat. Is he okay? I asked as the other men came inside with the women I'd shared the underground prison with. The warlock who held me grimaced. I've never seen Shadow go down like that. Even after fights that would have killed most men. What happened down there? The man who carried a very pregnant Nadine stepped around Shadow. He took on several vampires alone. Saved our asses. The warlock nodded. Come with me. I'll send someone for Shadow. I squeaked out a rejection. I didn't want to leave him. Don't worry, the warlock told me, holding me tightly in his arms. We'll come back for him. I promise. The warlock held his head high as he carried me along a brightly lit tunnel and into a room with a bed and medical equipment. He didn't show any sign of emotion, but I could tell he didn't want to carry me. And I didn't blame him. I was disgusting. I can have a shower if you have one, I whispered. He shook his head as he put me down onto the white sheets, the softness strange against my skin. No. First you need fluids and food. Then you can shower, or I will have one of my nurses clean you. He glanced over his shoulder. Would you like Shadow in here with you? I stared at him, not sure why he'd asked such a question. But there was only one answer that felt right. Yes, please. I needed Shadow near me. I wasn't sure why, but I felt bereft when his arms weren't around me. He nodded and went about setting up a second bed. I'll help the others, then I'll be back. The other men lingered in the doorway with Nadine and Sasha. Thank you. All of you. For getting us out. I couldn't create long sentences and my breathing wasn't great, but I wouldn't give up until I had my strength back. The two men nodded at me, then followed the warlock out. I was propped on my elbows with my neck straining. I took a steadying breath and lay back, the softness beneath my back foreign and yet familiar from my childhood. Knock knock, a woman called from the open door. I'm Josie, one of the nurses here. Can I come in and set up your IV? I nodded, looking the woman over. She had long blonde hair and a bubbly personality that made me like her straight away. She also had a ripple of magic around her that hinted at some witch in her. So why hadn't she been captured by the vampires like I had? Thank you, I said as she brought in 2 clear bags and began setting up the IVs. This one is for fluid mostly, she said, then TSKED when she saw the gashes and scarring on my arms from the blown veins. I think we're going to need to be creative with you. She managed to find a vein in my foot that wasn't damaged by the vampires, and slipped the needle in so gently I didn't even feel it. Which, after all the blood draining they'd done to me, was heaven. I sighed as she started the first IV. And this one has a whole lot of glucose to try and get that body of yours healing, though I'm sure Nathaniel will be in here to do some magic on you soon. I leaned back into the pillow. So he is a warlock. And you're a witch. My instincts aren't failing me. That's why the magic felt familiar. I was beginning to relax, slowly, beneath the bright lights and the warmth of the fluid seeping into my veins. There was a groan from the doorway, and I glanced in the direction of the noise, a new warmth spreading through me, closer to my heart than I wanted to admit. Get in the bed, you stubborn bastard. The warlock growled at Shadow, who leaned against the doorframe, one eye open. Get off, Shadow said, shaking his shoulder. He lifted his head, and a tremor of a smile tilted up his lips as he stared at me. Hey. You okay? I nodded. I am. Thanks to you. Are you okay? Yep. He heaved himself across the room, his back bent and his limp even more pronounced now. When he reached the bed, he let out a pained groan as he rotated and fell onto the blankets. Then he closed his eyes and a soft moan left his lips. I hated seeing him in so much pain. I opened my mouth to tell him that I wished I was better, that I could heal him. Back in the day when I was well, I had great healing magic. But it was gone, and I had no idea if it would ever return. So instead, I glanced at the nurse attending me. She grinned back. I'll set Shadow up with some fluids. Nathaniel, this gorgeous girl needs some of your magic. Shadow's gaze flashed to me, both eyes open again. Just keep your hands to yourself, he snapped at Nathaniel. My mouth dropped open, horrified he'd speak to the warlock like that. Nathaniel just cackled with laughter. Well, my old friend. It's like that, is it? He asked, though it sounded like a rhetorical question. Josie attended to Shadow, while Nathaniel walked over to me and smiled. I'm going to do a little repair work. I can't do anything for your memories, I'm afraid. My magic doesn't work well with mental scars. But I can heal your flesh. The scarring on your arms. Speed up the rebuilding of your strength and muscles. And these damaged veins. I bit my lip. Part of me wanted to keep the scars in my flesh, a vivid reminder of the war I'd participated in and survived. But they would call the attention of the vampires to me, and that was the last thing I wanted. Do you have a way of disguising my scent? I asked. I don't really care about the scars, but I want to make sure the vampires never find me again. I was proud of the way my voice barely trembled as I spoke. But tears burned my eyes and the back of my throat. I can't go back. I swallowed hard. I'd rather die. So, if there's anything you can do. There was a silence in the room, then Nathaniel smiled. Wait right here. He disappeared, and I glanced over at the weird shifter lying in the bed opposite me. He was staring at me like he was afraid to blink in case I disappeared. I'll never let them take you. I give you my word. Never. His voice had a strange vibration to it, almost like a hiss. I nodded, not sure if Shadow had the power to make such a declaration, but he certainly seemed confident. Nathaniel hurried back into the room, purple coat waving in the breeze. He reminded me of my Uncle Larry. My very gay Uncle Larry. Drink this, Nathaniel said, unstoppering a small bottle and handing it to me. This is a potion that will disguise your magical scent. I glanced over at Josie, who grinned. We all take it. Tastes like moldy blueberries, but hey, better than the alternative. I put the bottle to my lips and tipped it back. The potion slid down my parched throat, the taste just as Josie had described. But with dirt. That was interesting, I said with a swallow. Thank you. My stomach gurgled loudly, and I pressed a hand to my belly to stifle the noise. I hope I don't vomit it back up. That would be a real waste. You shouldn't, Nathaniel said with a frown. There's nothing poisonous in it. I waved my hand. Oh no. I didn't mean there was anything wrong with the potion. It's just that. I swallowed again, my throat aching from all this talking. They didn't really feed us. I haven't eaten proper food for a while. They'd kept us alive through IVs, similar to the one I had attached to my foot. As though she'd read my mind, Josie whisked over and detached the IVs that were already half empty. Then how about I get you some nice soup and we start rebuilding that body of yours, she said, her voice light, though I could hear the sympathy behind it. That would be great, I said. Thanks. She bustled off and Nathaniel stepped forward. Close your eyes and rest, Katie. I know you're tired and in a lot of pain. Let me see if I can help with that a little. He raised his hands and the magical white glow of a powerful warlock's magic shimmered in his palms. I closed my eyes and let his healing powers wash over my body. It's okay, I said, quoting Shadow, but it felt appropriate. Pain and I are old friends. Chapter 3. Shadow. Despite the seriousness of the conversation to which I was listening, I couldn't help the smile that flirted at the edges of my mouth. She'd quoted what I said in the underground. It seemed that we had more in common than I realized, though bonding over a mutual need to deal with chronic pain was hardly something to be happy about. Nathaniel finished making Katie glow with white light, and at the end of it she looked better. She seemed fuller in the face, and her skin was a healthier color. Nathaniel turned to me and rubbed his hands together. Your turn. No. I waved my hand in his direction. You know I'm not up for any magical healing. Nathaniel dropped his hands and frowned at me. There are no medals for being tougher than everyone else, Shadow. You know I can help you with your pain. I rolled onto my side and heaved myself up to a sitting position. It's good training for when I need to put up with more. I hated how Nathaniel's magic felt. It was fake. It made me weak. My gaze slid over to where Katie was now peacefully snoring away. Poor woman probably hadn't had a proper night's sleep in ages. Not that many of us did. Thank you, I choked out to Nathaniel. For helping us. Nathaniel's gaze slid over to Katie, then moved back to me. There was a gleam in his eye. Does she know? Shush. I whispered. And know what? He rolled his eyes. Relax. She'll sleep all day now. I put a touch of sedative in that potion, so she could catch up on a little rest. She needs sleep so that she can heal. I nodded. Good. Does she know that she's your mate? Nathaniel asked. I stared at him. How was I going to bluff my way out of this one? A lot of people thought I could read minds, but I couldn't. I just read people's body language and facial expressions. If I was related to them, the way I was with Sadie by blood, then I could get a little more from them. A word or a thought here and there. She's not my mate. What are you talking about? Nathaniel stepped closer and pressed a hand to my shoulder. You're not the only one who can read a room, Shadow. There was a light breeze against my cheek, and suddenly I could breathe better again. Hey, I said, shaking off his hand. I said no magic. Nathaniel grinned as he strolled to the door. I own this place, Shadow, not you. Don't tell me what to do. He stopped and turned back to me. Seriously though, if the vampires come for her, don't you want to at least be able enough to put up a decent fight? I opened my mouth to reply, then slammed it shut again. He was right. Now was not the time to be stubborn. Thanks. He shook his head. Will wonders never cease? Rest up, my friend. I have a feeling this roller coaster ride is only just beginning. I lay back on the soft, clean bed, enjoying the sensation of no pain for the moments it lingered. Nathaniel's magic was strong, and it would get me through the next few days. But soon my twisted spine would start to ache and I'd be thrust back into my world of pain once more. Damn, I needed a smoke. No smoking in the hospital. Nathaniel called from down the hall. That guy definitely had mind-reading powers. Fine. A shower then. I hauled myself up to my feet and stretched. God, he was good. My ribs felt great and all my bleeding had stopped. I walked toward the ensuite bathroom, and even my limp wasn't as pronounced. I opened the door, glanced back to check that Katie was still sleeping, then ambled inside the small white room. Nathaniel's hospital was more like a swanky hotel, with soft lighting, plush pillows, and rather decadent bathroom facilities. I shook my head as I stripped off all my clothes, dropping the blood-covered rags on the floor. Then I turned on the shower head, adjusted the water, and stepped beneath the spray. Oh, God. The heat against my muscles was utter bliss, and as I reached forward I pressed my hands against the tiles and bent my head, letting the water flow over me. I hadn't stopped to enjoy a shower in too long to think about. I was always moving, always chasing, always hiding. My job as a PI meant that someone always wanted me dead. That didn't allow for a lot of long hot showers where I could close my eyes and not think about who was on their way. Nathaniel's hospital was one of the only places I could do that. The magical illusions were strong enough to keep this place and its patrons safe. I picked up the soap and started scrubbing. I was caked in the scent of the underground. By the time the door opened, the underground scent was washed away, and the smell of fresh soap permeated the air. I assumed it must be the nurse Josie, come to deliver clothes, meds, or food. But when I turned, I met a set of gorgeous blue eyes with a magical purple swirl. I froze. Katie. Oh, I'm so sorry. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. What's wrong? She turned away, obviously disgusted by my body, then glanced back. I heard the shower. I don't know. I'm freezing. Could I jump in when you're done? How was she awake when Nathaniel said she'd sleep through the next several hours? Of course. I said, grabbing a nearby white towel and winding it around my waist. I'll leave the water on for you. It's nice and hot. She smiled as I grabbed another towel and began to dry my hair and upper body. I'll get out of your way, I said as she dropped the thin chemise she'd been wearing onto the pile of dirty clothes I'd left. She wore nothing but a pair of dirty panties now, and my throat ran dry. "Please don't leave," she said. "I know I'm disgusting to look at, but I don't want you to go. I don't want to be alone." "You're not disgusting. You're beautiful." The words fell out of my mouth. She glanced down and shook her head. "I was once, but the vampires destroyed me." I shook my head, moving over to lean against the sink. "Nathaniel's magic is healing you. You're looking healthier by the minute. Look." I pointed to the mirror, and Katie stepped up in front of it. She lifted her hand and traced the outline of her ribs and her gently rounded flesh. She was still very thin. Her legs looked more like bones than actual thighs, but still she was bigger than she had been an hour ago. "I still don't want you to go." "All right. I won't." I shook my head. "Not if you don't want me to. I feel safer with you here." She wobbled her way to the shower and put out her hand. She gasped as though the water pained her. I inhaled sharply as she pushed her panties down her legs, then once again put out her hands to feel the pressure of the shower. "Do you want me to turn it down?" She nodded, stepping out of the way so I could reach the tap. "Yes, please." I steeled myself against the desire pouring through my veins. The last thing I should do was lust after a woman who'd just been through hell. But the fated mate bond knew no such boundaries. I walked into the shower alongside her, and she swayed on her feet like an exhausted reed in the wind. I held my breath as I twisted the dial and adjusted the shower head to reduce the pressure, not wanting to touch her, intensely grateful for the towel wrapped around my waist. The water changed from a downpour to a light rain, and I felt Katie's sigh on my back. "Oh, thank you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak when my various shifters were all snarling inside of me. My wolf shifter, the strongest of all, howled with passion. Instead of succumbing to my baser instincts, I forced myself to march across the bathroom and sit down on the toilet lid to avoid any accidental touching, or worse. This woman had been through so much. The last thing she needed was someone like me groping her. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Katie asked into the silence. I had to drag my gaze off the tiles to focus on her face. She was all soaked up, and something melted inside me at seeing the beauty before me. "Of course," I said, though generally the answer to that sort of question would be hell no. I ran a hand through my tangled, wet hair, and continued to wait for her to ask what she wanted. I had so many questions myself. What was it like down there in the underground? Who were her parents? How much witch blood did she have? How long had she been there? How had they taken her? Could she feel the attraction between us that shimmered and purred like a finely tuned engine? "What sort of shifter warlock mix are you?" she asked, then bit her lip in a self-conscious way that hit me way below the belt. "I know that's probably quite rude, but if you wouldn't mind sharing it with me." I would normally care very much. The information wasn't something I revealed to many people. "I'm a mix." I crossed my arms over my bare chest. I really needed to get dressed, but she'd asked me not to leave her alone. A soft chuckle sounded. "I know. That part's obvious." I glanced across at her. She was carefully cleaning her skin, inspecting every puncture mark and hole those arsehole vampires had made in her flesh, frowning at every mark. I had to distract her. "Wanna guess?" I asked her. "I'll tell you if you hit the right combination." Most people couldn't see the warlock blood in me, unless I told them, like Sadie. But Katie had picked it up straight away. A ghost of a smile shimmered in her eyes. "Sure. I can sense the warlock, that's obvious." I laughed at that. "To you maybe. No one else has ever sensed it. Not even my own cousin." She shrugged as she rubbed some shampoo in her hands, then applied it to her waist-length hair. "I haven't washed my hair since they took me. I wonder if it would be better just to cut it all off." She rubbed her hands through her hair, then her arms dropped. She groaned, tried again, then let her arms fall. "Yeah, I think shaving it off and starting again might be easier." What's wrong? I asked. I can't hold my arms up. The muscles are, too weak. I stood up. I wasn't having her shave her head if she didn't want to. She was beginning to tremble from standing. Of course, she didn't have the energy to wash her hair. I walked back over to the stall and pulled a shower chair over with me that had been resting against the wall. Sit. I'll wash your hair for you. She stared at me with wide open eyes, her vulnerability as obvious as the quiver in her lower lip. I gave her half a smile. Though I warn you, I've only ever washed my own. And not that often either. She sank into the chair with a grateful sigh and picked up the shampoo bottle for me. Here you go. I stood behind her and tilted the head of the shower so it warmed her thighs. Is that all right? She nodded and said quietly, yes. Thank you. I took a deep breath and got to work.
Chapter 4. Katie. I didn't know how long I'd been down in the underground. There had been no daylight, no clocks, no way of measuring time. I ended up counting how many times they took away bags of my blood. There had been 372 bag changes, give or take a few. Did that correlate to days? Weeks? I didn't know. But it had felt like an entire lifetime. In the end, I'd craved the sleep and the pain-killing IVs they put into my body. I'd wanted to be dead. Every day. I'd prayed for it. Begged the vampires who drained me until I passed out to kill me. That was until the door had opened and Shadow had rushed toward me, picked me up in his arms and carried me away from hell. At the time it had felt like a dream, part of a fantasy I'd conjured up in my drugged sleep. After all, how many times had I envisioned a savior? A man who would do exactly what Shadow did, walk into the hellhole I was being kept in, kill all the vampires, and carry me away. Well, he hadn't killed all the vampires, but I was sure he'd killed more than a few in his day. He had the strength and cunning for it. He'd proven that when he fought 3 of them at once. He also had the scent of one who'd taken a life, or 20. Tilt your head back a little if you can, Shadow said, as he rubbed some of the rose-scented shampoo into the top of my head. My neck started to ache, weak in all upright positions. And back to normal. I moaned as I shifted my head back into the right spot. Sorry, I mumbled, embarrassed to be groaning over such a small thing. Shadow moved his hands over my hair, from the ends to the crown, then set his fingertips into my scalp and began to massage my head the way a hairdresser would. You never need to apologize, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how you survived down there, but I'm glad you did. Tears prickled in my eyes and I swallowed hard. Yeah. Me too. I closed my eyes and let Shadow wash the dirt and grime away. Then he leaned over me, took the head of the shower off the handle and gently rinsed away the suds. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't want to see the black water that I knew would be washing over my skin and down toward the drain. A moan erupted from my throat. That feels like heaven. He put the head of the shower back, the water beating a steady rhythm onto my legs. Then he repeated the shampooing, massaging and scrubbing, then washing it all away. Then he did it again, and I sighed. 3 shampoos? That's a first. He chuckled. Yeah, well, I like to be thorough. A tingle of something akin to excitement fluttered inside my belly. But that wasn't possible, surely? How could I be feeling anything even close to desire when I was in this sort of physical state? It didn't seem right. I shook the feeling away. Is that necessary in your job? Not the hair washing. The thoroughness? Yeah. I'm a PI. A private investigator. I grinned. A Sherlock Holmes, huh? Why don't I believe that you're snooping after cheating wives or embezzling money clerks? Shadow washed the suds away once more. This time I opened my eyes and was happy to see relatively white bubbles floating down over my skin. My work is a little different to that, he admitted, then grabbed the conditioner. How should I do this? Is there a brush or... I shook my head, black spots beginning to twinkle at the edges of my vision. Just slap some in. I think I need to lie down. Shadow squirted a handful of conditioner into my hair, rubbed it in, quickly washed it out, then swung me up into his arms just as I was beginning to sway on my seat. I let my head fall onto his naked chest. It felt so comforting to be in his arms. Thanks for that. I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. I can't believe how weak I am. We stepped out of the bathroom and into the bedroom just as the door opened and Nathaniel walked into the room. He froze mid-stride, his lips quirking up at the edges as though trying not to laugh. Am I interrupting something? I smiled at him, too exhausted to lift my head. Shadow was helping me shower, but I got too weak and almost fainted. That wiped the smirk off Nathaniel's face. I need to do some more healing for you. And perhaps get you some clothes. I glanced down at my body. It meant nothing to me. Yeah, sorry. Modesty isn't really a priority, after what I went through. Shadow emitted a soft growl, before turning and looking at my blackened sheets. She needs fresh bedding. I almost laughed at the sound. He had wolf shifter in him. That was nice. Good for night vision, speed and strength. I wonder what else there is. I'll find Josie and come back in 5, Nathaniel said before disappearing. I patted Shadow's chest, enjoying the amount of energy rolling off him. I wasn't sure if he was protecting me or jealous or what. But it was nice to be near someone who felt so much. Especially after being around vampires for so long. Their aura was that of death, indifference or evil. I shuddered. Josie bustled into the room, stripped my bed, and remade it with crisp, clean white linen. Thank you. She smiled at me, then bent over and retrieved a hospital gown from one of the drawers next to my bed. How about we put this on you, and I'll go in search of something comfortable for you to wear. I nodded, and Shadow set me on my feet. Josie put the gown on me, tied it up, and folded back the blankets for me. I slid between the covers, my body aching from all the standing. That's so much better, thank you. I lay back on the pillows, unable to hold up my head any longer. That shower had taken everything out of me. You need some hot soup, Josie said as she folded up the dirty sheets and carried them out of the room. Shadow turned around, still wearing his wet towel, then looked at his bed. My bed's gross as well. There's more dry towels or these lovely, fancy gowns, I managed, though my eyes were beginning to close. I'll get Josie to change my bed too. I let exhaustion drag me down into sleep. I could hear people moving around and talking softly, then the warmth of Nathaniel's magic on me once more. I smiled and lay still, letting him do whatever it was he wanted to do. Shadow was right. I had looked better in the mirror than I'd imagined. My eyes were still sunken, my ribs protruding. But every time Nathaniel did his magic, I felt my body strengthen. When he was done, I opened my eyes. Thank you for that. Nathaniel stared down at me. How are you awake? That spell should have knocked you out for the whole day. I shrugged, staring up at him. Why are you trying to drug me? I wasn't really worried about his motives. For him, like most doctors, he probably thought that making me sleep would help me, but I'd been sleeping for most of the time in the underground and I didn't want to sleep anymore. It's not drugs. Nathaniel's pale cheeks flushed a little. I need to get something. I'll be back in a moment. He left the room, and I glanced across at where Shadow was grinning. What's so funny? I asked him. He rolled onto his side where he lay, shirtless in his new clean sheets. Nathaniel is one of the most composed people I know. Nothing ruffles him. And you just shot him to smithereens. Well done. I rolled onto my side to face him, but kept my head on the soft pillow. I didn't mean to. And that's what's so beautiful about it. A long moment of silence passed, then I decided to start up our conversation again. So, I said, you're part wolf shifter then? How much? Almost half. Shadow nodded, his dark eyes flashing with the yellow of his wolf, then a touch of purple. My father was mostly wolf shifter, so yes. What was the other part? I asked. Let me guess. It's another shifter. I looked at him, assessing his body. He walked with a slight limp, and his shoulders curved into a hump when he was in pain. It had to be an animal that didn't fit well with a warm-blooded mammal. I glanced up at his face where, in the light, I could see his skin properly. Scales. You're part reptile, aren't you? I asked. What sort? His nostrils flared. Yes. Snake? I grinned. That's amazing. He snorted. Hardly. It gave me the skin, but you're right. There is some good in it. My snake genes hide my magic from the vampires. I tried to sit up, but found no strength in my arms, so lay back into the pillow. What do you mean? Now that was something I needed. Reptile genetics cause a scent in a person's skin that can mask warlock or witch blood. My cousin Sadie, the woman who was with me when we rescued you, her mother cast a spell that imprinted Sadie with snake blood. My blood actually, not that I told her that, he said with a twist of his lips, but I could see the pride behind his eyes. And that saved her? I asked, amazed. Was it really that easy? He nodded. Yes. The spell must be done by a witch of vast power, which Sadie's mom was. Was. Is. Hopefully. Everyone thought she died in the underground a long time ago, though I heard rumors that she may still be alive. I transferred those rumors to my cousin, which is what made Sadie organize the rescue party. A memory surfaced through my brain. There was another woman down there. Older. They kept her isolated. In her own room. Shadow's eyes opened wide. That could be her. If she was still alive after all this time, that would be a miracle. I didn't want to think about it. To have survived what they did to us was bad enough. But to spend a lifetime down there. No. I'd rather be dead. Nathaniel bustled back into the room, holding a crystal and a string. May I? He asked. I nodded and rolled onto my back, nausea spreading through my belly. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer to the question he was about to ask my body. The warlock hung the crystal over my center and moved it up and down, murmuring to himself. When he got to my lower abdomen, the crystal turned cloudy white and began to hum a song I hadn't heard before. Nathaniel snatched the crystal back into his hand, then slid it into the pocket of his jacket. Katie, I'm afraid I have to tell you something. My stomach twisted and I wanted to cry. I met the warlock's gaze and nodded, my eyes filling with tears. No, please. Not that. They succeeded, didn't they? I whispered. He glanced at Shadow, then back at me, pity clear in his eyes. I'm sorry to tell you this, Katie, but yes. You're pregnant.
Chapter 5. Shadow. My heart stopped. Nathaniel's words circled around and around in my head. She's pregnant. How was that possible? She'd been in the underground for so long. Then it hit me, the truth of her impregnation, just as the sound of Katie's sobs cracked open my heart. I got up from my bed and without thinking, picked her up, rearranged the blankets and sat back down on her bed with her in my arms. It's okay. It'll be okay. I rocked her on the bed, Katie's sobs ringing in the room. I dragged my gaze up to Nathaniel, where he stood staring down at us. It's okay, I said again on automatic, cupping Katie's head to me. She pushed up from my chest and glared at me. It's not okay. She struggled against me, so I turned her around and sat her on the bed next to me so she could talk to Nathaniel. Can I get rid of it? She demanded. I shuddered at the thought of how such a baby had been conceived, and how Katie must feel about it. A baby conceived in rape must be an incredibly hard thing for the mother to process. I opened my mouth to say something, but Nathaniel cut me off. It depends on how far along you are. Do you know? She shook her head. Time doesn't move normally in the underground. I can't even tell you how long I was down there. Nathaniel and I exchanged a worried glance, then he started backing toward the door. I'll go and find an ultrasound machine. I won't be long. He disappeared again. I stared after him. I'd spent a decade trying to ruffle that man's feathers, to no avail. I'd seen him more shocked today than in the 10 years I'd known him. I glanced at Katie's tear-stained face, then started to slide off the bed so she could lie down. She grabbed for me, her warm hands clinging to my biceps. I shivered, the feel of my mate's hands on me almost too good to name. "Don't leave." "I won't," I said, grateful for the clean jeans I wore thanks to Josie finding them in a cupboard somewhere. "I was just moving so you could lie down." I grabbed a chair and dragged it close to her bed while she slid down onto her back and sighed. Not exactly the way I pictured my first baby's ultrasound. I looked at the floor. As a man, and one who had sworn never to have his own children due to my genes, this wasn't a moment I'd ever thought about for myself. "Are you sure you want to destroy it?" I said, preparing for a slap to the head I probably deserved. Instead, she pressed her lips into a thin line. "I don't know." She covered her face with her hands, so I had no way of reading her anymore. Was she ashamed of the fact she might want to keep a baby bred for the vampire's purposes? Did she remember the event that caused it? So many questions, none of which I had the right to ask. I reached out for her hand and squeezed hard. "I'm here if you need me. Okay?" She nodded, breathing deeply through her nose. Nathaniel came back in, dragging a primitive-looking machine with a screen. I glared at him. "I'm not sure she wants to see it." He nodded, and set up the screen facing away from Katie. "But I do have to see what's in there, I'm afraid. Katie, could you please lift your gown up and I'll put some gel on your skin?" She reached down and pulled up the hospital gown she still wore, showing her flat belly and protruding hips. "How?" I shook my head. "Sorry. Ignore me." How had someone so unwell, so unhealthy, managed to conceive at all? As though hearing my question, Katie turned her head toward me, her eyes sad. "The man who impregnates the witches trapped in the underground is a warlock. I've heard from the other girls that his magic is so strong it allows his children to grow, practically anywhere." My hands tightened into fists where they rested on my knees. "Anyone I know?" She sighed. "It's not his fault." "It's not his what?" I exploded. "He's kept prisoner in the underground, just like we are. They drain him too, then force him to inseminate us." "Inseminate? So that means—" She shook her head. "I wasn't raped. He can't do that, I don't think. He's too weak. And I don't even remember them doing it." She put her hands over her face, and I sank back in my chair in relief. Although still terrible, it was so much better than the version I had created in my mind. The version most of my clients and associates believe. I glanced over at Nathaniel, trying hard not to look at the black and white screen he was staring at. "How are the 2 other women we brought here?" Nathaniel didn't look my way. He was too busy tapping on keys and moving the little wand around. "They're doing well. I'll keep both of them here until we can find a safe place for them. Especially Nadine. She's due to give birth any day." He turned toward Katie, his eyes showing a sympathy that made my stomach drop. "Katie, this is a tough call. You are weak and your child is very strong. If you tell me that you'd rather die than go through with this pregnancy, I will help you abort it. The fetus is on the cusp of being too old to terminate, but it will come down to your will on this one. I will do as you instruct." I glanced at Katie's face. Emotions warred in her eyes. Then she looked at me as if for guidance, and my heart practically broke in my chest. "How can I help?" I asked her. She inhaled deeply, her nostrils flaring. "I don't know if I could raise a child, when I don't even know if his father is alive or dead, or who he even is." I squeezed the hand I still held. "You can do anything you set your mind to. The only real question is, do you want this child? Because if she did, I had no idea what I was thinking. My thoughts were in turmoil." Katie blinked and tears coursed silently down her face. Then she glanced over at Nathaniel. "Can I see it?" "Of course you can." Nathaniel turned the monitor around so that both of us could see the blank screen, then he set the wand back on Katie's lower abdomen. "Oh my," Katie whispered before she placed her hand over her mouth. There on the screen was the most perfect little baby. Rounded head, a string of white pearls for a spine, and tiny arms and legs moving slowly around. She. "They're beautiful," Katie said, tears welling in her eyes for an entirely new reason now. That baby was half Katie. Something shifted inside of me as I stared at it, a long-lost hope springing to life like a buried plant amongst the ash. "Too early to know what it is," Nathaniel said, "but from what my limited experience tells me, the baby is strong and healthy." I nodded and dragged my eyes away from the screen. "I'll help you," I said, my throat choking with emotion. Even though she didn't know it yet, this woman was my mate. And I would take on this baby for her. Her gaze flew to mine. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you want to keep this baby, I'll help you. Stay with you. Protect you. Love this baby like it was my own." Katie's lip trembled. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't. I'm offering. But if you don't want to go through with it, I'll stay here and help you while you regain your strength." Part of me wanted to reveal all to her right now. That I was her mate. That I couldn't and wouldn't have children of my own. I lived with chronic pain, a lifelong smoking addiction, and the weirdest mix of shifters growling, snapping, and slithering inside of me. I wouldn't pass that on to a child. So if Katie accepted me as her mate, this child may be the only one she ever had. The only one I would ever have. Just like that, my mind was made up. But it wasn't my decision to make. Katie held her breath, then said, "Can I have a day or two to think about it?" Nathaniel smiled. "Of course." He handed her a towel to wipe away the gel, and as soon as she was done, her hand slipped back to her still flat belly, cradling her child. Warmth spread through me like melted honey. She'd keep her baby, who'd be magical and strong, and hunted like nothing else by the vampires who'd bred it for its blood. Katie and her baby needed my protection. More than anyone. Nathaniel cleaned off his instruments, packed up his machine, and gave me a pointed look. "I'll leave you two alone to talk." I glared back at him. "Talk? About what?" Katie asked. Neither of us answered as Nathaniel slipped out of the room and shut the door. Katie reached out and squeezed my hand. "What's he referring to?" I shook my head. "It's nothing. Nathaniel's just being an interfering pain in the ass." Katie frowned at me. "You have something you need to tell me, don't you?" I clenched my jaw. Then I exhaled slowly. This wasn't how someone was supposed to find out they were fated to be mated to me. She narrowed her eyes. "You're married, aren't you? Or you have like 10 kids dotted around the city." I burst out laughing. For the first time in my entire life, someone had truly surprised me. I laughed and coughed, then laughed again. Oh my God. I need a cigarette so badly. My hands were beginning to shake from the withdrawal, but at least due to Nathaniel's healing magic, I wasn't in much pain. She crossed her arms over her chest. "Smoking's not good for the baby." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How was I meant to fight that logic? Then I sobered. "I'm not married. I don't have any children." I shrugged. "I never expected to." "Why not?" "Well, I never thought I'd have a fated mate, nor find anyone who would fall in love with me." "A fated mate?" Katie repeated. "Like a soulmate?" I nodded, absorbing the fact that she didn't know what that was. Which meant she was mostly human and witch. Yes, shifters can have a fated mate if they're lucky. A person designed only for them. My cousin Sadie has 3. 3? Katie said, her eyes goggling out of her head. How does she manage 3? I chuckled. I don't really know, and I don't want to think about it, to be frank. Katie lowered her gaze and glanced down at her hands. You don't have a fated mate? She began twisting the white sheet between her fingers and my stomach tightened. I could do this. I could. I had the balls to be honest with her. I do, actually. Katie's head shot up, her eyes round and big. You do? Who? My heart began to pound in my chest as I swallowed hard against the fear racing along my veins. How was she going to respond to finding out she was probably stuck with my screwed-up, chain-smoking ass forever? I straightened my crooked spine and looked her in the eye. You are, Katie. You're my fated mate. I'm so sorry.
Chapter 6. Kara. By the time we finished dinner and returned to the town square, a huge bonfire was standing half-built in the middle of the clearing. A group of guys emerged, each carrying a vast log over his shoulders. They were all shouting with laughter and trying to shoulder-barge their friends so that they'd drop their cargo. At the sight of the bonfire, they dumped the logs, with others bringing handfuls of kindling to add to the pyre. Early evening had fallen. The sky above us was faded blue, and fireflies darted through the loose clusters of pack members who surrounded the pyre. The people's chatter and laughter filled the open air, growing louder as we approached. A sharp pang pierced through me. The atmosphere was familiar, and yet not. If I closed my eyes, I could imagine, just for a second, that I was back in my own pack, with the people I'd known my whole life, getting ready for an evening of celebration. I could almost reach out and touch them, the people who loved me just as fiercely as I loved them, my family, back where I belong. And then the bubble of familiarity was gone, and I was surrounded instead by strangers on a rival pack's land, and the only people I knew here were Ronan, Kit, and Elder Frey. Hey. Ronan moved his head closer to mine. Even over the noise of the gathering, his deep voice made my skin tingle. We can head home if you want. Get an early night. No one would mind, I swear. Home. He meant the Alpha's house. The place with the empty walls. I'm fine, I whispered. Then I said it again, a little louder, and found myself believing it. I would be fine. I would make sure of it. Ronan squeezed my fingers, so brief I barely had time to react. Come on, I'll introduce you to some folks. I let him lead me over to the log bearers, who all looked up as we approached. They were almost done with the bonfire. It was taller than I was by a good 1.5 feet. They were all panting with exertion, but they had bright smiles for both of us. What did you do to build this? Ronan walked toward them, nodding at the structure. Chop down half the forest? I guess you'll never know, since you weren't here to help us. The nearest one shot back, before rushing over and pulling Ronan into a hug. Where have you been, man? Ronan extracted himself and hooked his thumbs into his pockets, giving a loose shrug. The guy who had hugged Ronan didn't seem bothered by his lack of response. Instead, his gaze slid over and landed on me. Unlike Kid and Ronan, this guy's hair was sandy and short. A deep scar ran through his left brow. Aren't you going to introduce us? He said to Ronan, grinning at me. Ronan sidled in close to me, as if he didn't like the other man's gaze on me. Kara, this is Noah. He pointed to the shorter guy just behind. That's Jake. And the guy with the burning torch is Zach. Noah whirled around. Zach? He strode away from us with his hands flung wide. Come on, man. Not cool. We were gonna light it up together. You know that. He and Zach started to bicker over the torch, which burnt out, unnoticed, between them. Ronan and I were breathless with laughter as we wandered away, weaving through the crowd. Are they always like that? Pretty much, yeah. Ronan's eyes were soft, still glowing with amusement. They're good guys. We grew up together. They never treated me any different for being the Alpha's son or anything, and I appreciate that. I know I can trust those three. I thought of Alara, my best friend, the person who, aside from my brother, I knew the best out of anyone. That was how I knew her, not as my Alpha, but first and foremost as my friend. It was how I still thought of her, my best friend. Growing up, it had never occurred to me that she had a huge weight on her shoulders, an expectation that one day she would follow in her father's footsteps. When she ran off to the city, it had hurt. But I understood why she had done it. Now that she was back, it was as if she'd never left. I hoped that she felt about me as Ronan clearly did about his friends. Trust in friendship was important and rare, and when you found it, you had to hold on to it. Sure, I said eventually. I took Ronan's hand in mine like I'd done it 1,000 times before. He looked down at our entwined fingers, surprise in his eyes, but he didn't let go. Hand in hand, we made our way over to a long trestle table, where food and drinks were being laid out. I became aware that we were being watched. A tall, willowy woman stood nearby, leaning against a wall with her arms folded. Her eyes were fixed on us. When I glanced at her, she raised an eyebrow as if in challenge. I froze. It couldn't be. But it was. Naomi. "Hey, what's wrong?" Ronan asked me. I nodded over to where Naomi was standing. She hadn't taken her eyes off us. Her gaze remained challenging, like she was daring me to start something. "What is she doing here?" I hissed. Over the past few hours, I'd been growing more and more relaxed in this new environment, but one sight of Naomi was all it took to get my hackles back up. "Wait, Naomi?" Ronan glanced in her direction, looking confused. "Do you know her?" "Yes, we've met before." Something in my tone must have registered my dislike, because his eyebrows crept toward his hairline. "Oh, this should be good." "She used to visit our pack," I said. "She managed to get her claws into my brother Jason. He even considered making her his mate. When his true mate came along, she wasn't happy, and she didn't care who knew it. I haven't seen her for months. It's just a shock, that's all." Ronan let out a low whistle. "Damn, that sounds like Naomi, all right." I gave him a questioning look, and he shrugged. "She's still a part of the Thornwood clan, but only in name. She comes around here when she wants something. The rest of the time, she's out causing trouble somewhere else. Shifters, humans, who knows?" He shook his head. "Who cares? As long as she's not making trouble here." "I guess every pack has its own poison," I said, thinking of Jamie. "Though, if she's still considered Thornwood, then anything she does would reflect on your pack's reputation, wouldn't it?" "Like Jamie and the Banes?" "Touché." Ronan was probably as responsible for Naomi's bad behavior as Alara was for Jamie's. Which was to say not at all. Naomi and Jamie, and others like them who behaved badly, were responsible for themselves. No one else could be blamed for any adult's poor life choices or decisions. Naomi's lip curled in a sneer, as if she could hear the negative train of my thoughts. I turned away from her, determined to put the toxic woman out of my head. Ronan and I lingered by the refreshment table. He poured me a drink of something sweet and fruity, and I sipped it as we turned back toward the center of the clearing. The bonfire was alight now, yellow tongues of flame creeping along the dry kindling, sending smoke into the sky. We only took a couple of steps in the direction of the bonfire before Naomi intercepted us. "Kara!" Her smooth voice set my teeth on edge. "Fancy running into you here. Long time no see." I forced my features into a smile. "Indeed. Hello, Naomi." Without meaning to, I shrank into Ronan's side as if my body already knew I would receive support from him, even if my head hadn't quite caught up. His hand tightened around mine. Naomi's gaze flicked down to our joined hands, and her eyes widened slightly, as if she'd only just noticed. "Oh, come on. You clocked us from 20 feet away, bitch. Enough with the theatrics already." "Oh, wow." Naomi let out a warm chuckle, but her eyes remained calculating. Snake eyes. "I see you didn't waste any time." Don't rise to her bait. That's exactly what she wants. "I'm here on business," I said, my voice tight. "Now, if you'll excuse us." "It sure doesn't look like it." Naomi folded her arms. The movement pushed her breasts forward, emphasizing her ample cleavage. She flicked a glance at Ronan, as if checking to see if he'd noticed. My eyes narrowed. "How long has it been? A few hours? I have to say, Kara, I really didn't think you had it in you." "Naomi." Ronan's voice was firm, an alpha's command. Naomi flinched a little, but then rallied. I'm serious. You always seemed so meek, so shy. Just like a sad little mouse, trailing around after me and your brother. A deep rumble began in Ronan's chest, and I tugged quickly on his hand. I've got this. Funny you should mention Jason. I tilted up my chin, meeting her narrowed gaze. He and Tammy have a beautiful new baby. They're doing amazingly, all three of them. I've never seen my brother so happy. How are you doing, Naomi? Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face turned red and she swiveled and rushed away. Good. She could choke on her own poisonous tongue for all I cared. Ronan released a huff of laughter. Remind me not to get on your bad side, he murmured, and I shrugged. All the grief that woman had given Jason and the empty promises she'd made was all in the past. She would never be able to hurt him again. Together, Ronan and I made our way toward the bonfire. You okay? Ronan bent his head close to mine. His eyes were full of concern. I nodded. I'm fine. I can handle her. He glanced behind us with a furrowed brow. I'm sure you can. You just proved that. Only be careful with her, okay? She doesn't take kindly to insults. I've seen her strike back, and strike hard. I don't want that to happen to you. I looked up at him, warmed all the way through by his concern. I will be careful, I promise. I have no intention of going anywhere near that bitch. His face smoothed out at my expression, and he softened, putting an arm around me. His arm felt good over my shoulders, warm and protective. I guess we should make the rounds, he said. That's the sort of thing one does at a party, right? You don't sound stoked at the prospect. Aren't alphas supposed to be extroverted and genial? His answering glower made me laugh. I leaned into his body and slid an arm around his waist. I'm just teasing, I whispered. You'll be a great alpha. You've got the command needed for the job. You got this.
Chapter 7. Shadow. As soon as I explained how important it was for us to leave, Katie withdrew into herself. She closed her eyes and curled up into a ball on the bed. I wasn't sure what had distressed her so much. I leaned over the large bed and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I stood up and began to pace around the room, my mind a whirl. I'd assumed Katie to be maybe 1/4 witch. Sadie's mom had been a full witch, Sadie was half. That in itself to me had been amazingly rare. But this, wow. None of my family were full-bloods. They'd all bred with shifters to decrease the magic in their genes for the advantage and safety of their children. But Katie had grown up somewhere where there wasn't such a threat from the vampires. Not like we had here. Where was Whitehorse exactly? And could we get there by car? Shadow, Nathaniel whispered from the hallway, and I paced over to the door, loving the temporary lack of pain in my back, legs and ribs. It was going to be a shit moment when Nathaniel's magic wore off, and I didn't feel this good anymore. Yeah? I asked, sticking my head out the door. Nathaniel gestured for me to come out, and I did, after glancing back at my mate, to see her still cuddled into herself on the bed. The food Josie brought had been forgotten. Nathaniel's hair stuck up at odd angles. What's wrong? I can't keep her here, he said. I'm sorry, Shadow. But I can't. They're going to come for her. They'll come for all of them. You can keep them safe, I said. You've always protected those the vampires are after. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, and it was obvious that was how he got to looking so bedraggled. I have 6 injured shifters, and 3 hurt witches in this hospital at the moment. I can't protect them all if the vampire blood ring finds us. She is more powerful than me. That's how she stays awake through every healing. I don't think the vampires knew how valuable she is, or they would have accidentally killed her long ago. You need to get her out of the state. I'll do everything I can to help you, but you need to go as soon as possible. I groaned and thrust both hands into my jeans pockets. Seriously, Nathaniel? You finally find one witch who's more powerful than you, and you kick her out. Insecure much? Nathaniel punched me in the arm. This isn't a joke. It's nothing to do with that. These girls will be missed, Shadow. The vampires will tear the city down around us, looking for them. My wards can only handle so much before they'll crumble and fall. I am responsible for everyone in this place. I can't risk her staying here for long. I tilted my head to the side. She's really more powerful than you? He nodded once, with more a jerk of the head than a purposeful nod. Yes. And speaking of which, he grabbed me by the arms and sudden heat burned up my shoulders and into my back. Hey, I said, pulling away from him. I staggered to the side of the hallway and leaned against the wall. Nathaniel stumbled back, so hard he landed on his ass in the hallway. So much for the always calm, charismatic warlock I used to know. What the hell did you do? I asked, squeezing my eyes shut as waves of ecstasy flowed over me. Nathaniel pushed up from the floor and stood. He straightened and flicked his jacket to square it up. I just shot you with every bit of healing magic I have. I'll be drained until tomorrow now, so let's hope the vampires don't attack tonight, but if they do, you'll be the one fighting them off. Not me. I stifled the moan of pleasure that swam through my veins, making me feel drunk in the worst way. My tongue was loose, my eyes were barely open. I wanted to crawl into bed with my mate and devour her whole. And I just might do that. I pushed away from the wall and began to drunkenly swagger back to my room. Why did you do that? I asked around the thickness in my throat. Nathaniel stared at me, the usually swirling purple eyes now a dark flatness I'd never seen before. Because you need it, Shadow. You're good, one of the best fighters I've ever seen. But you're gonna need more than your cunning to get Katie out of here, and to safety. You're going to need a miracle. I've given you everything I've got. Use it wisely. He walked away and I was left staring after him. What had he done to me? I could barely think straight. I staggered back into the room, stripped off my clothes, wanting to be out of the cloying hot layers, and slid between the cool sheets. Oh, that's better. I groaned as I lay down, though the room still spun around me. Are you okay? My mate whispered next to me. I reached for her and pulled her across the bed and into my arms. I am now. I dropped a kiss on her clean hair, loving the way she flattened her hands against my bare torso. What did Nathaniel say? She asked, stroking my skin in ways that made every part of me throb with desire. You need to stop doing that. I grabbed one of her hands that was circling my nipple. She gasped and pulled her hand back. Oh no. I turned onto my side and arranged us so I could stare at her while we lay with our heads on the soft pillows. Don't misunderstand me. It felt good. Then why did you ask me to stop? I laughed. Because I couldn't find the words and my eyesight was failing me. I could barely see her through my drunken vision. Bloody warlock. It's okay. I understand, she said, then she dropped her gaze. I groaned in frustration. You don't understand, or you wouldn't look so miserable. Oh shit. My filter is totally gone. I shook my head. I want you to touch me, but I'm trying not to offend you. What would offend me about that? She asked, glancing up and meeting my eyes. As with so many moments in my life, the answer was in actions, not words. Afterward, I closed my eyes, relaxing into a post-loving bliss. We likely had a few hours before we would need to leave. I could get in a small nap. Katie took my hand and pressed it to her belly. Where once there had been only flatness was now a soft, rounded curve. Exhaustion dragged me down, but I cupped her belly with my palm and held Katie and her child through the darkness into sleep. Chapter 8. Shadow. Wake up, Shadow, Nathaniel whispered urgently, pulling me from my slumber. What is it? I mumbled. Maybe it was his magic. Normally I would wake in an instant. They're here. I growled as I rolled over and attempted to get to my feet. I staggered and shook my head, still half drunk with pain-killing magic. Was this how a normal person felt every day, when they didn't have to smoke like a chimney to battle the crippling pain in their body? Then I realized I was naked. Shit. I reached for the pile of clothes Josie had brought for me. I pulled on the jeans and picked up a grey shirt to pull on. The vampires from the blood ring? I asked. How could they possibly find us so fast? I mean, Katie drank the snake potion. Shouldn't that provide some protection? He shrugged. It should, and I would expect it has kicked in by now. But they must have tracked her here from the scent trail she left on the way here. Whatever the reason, they're here, and they're attempting to get in through the wards I have stationed around the hospital. Won't the wards kill them? I asked as I buttoned up the shirt. I glanced over at my mate, who was discreetly getting out of bed and going through the drawers for clothes of her own. I don't have any magic left, Nathaniel hissed at me. My wards are strong, I admit. I built them well. But if they get through, we're done for. You have to lead them away. I groaned. Why can't we stay here, wait it out? Surely they'll leave eventually. Even as I spoke the words out loud, I knew it was a ridiculous sentiment. The vampires would not give up that easily. Not to mention the fact that they were here for the other witches too, not just Katie. Nadine and Sasha are barely a quarter witch. Katie is a full-blood magical being. There is no way they're after the other two. Not with this much urgency. I glared at him. You're throwing us to the wolves, Nathaniel. I have given you every hope I can. Katie's had 3 healings and you have all my strength, Shadow. I have to protect my staff and my patients, and look, I'm sorry. But you need to leave. Nathaniel turned on his heel and stalked out. Bastard, I spat, running my hands through my hair, then tugging on the ends in frustration. Though part of me knew he was doing the right thing. He did have others to look after, not just us. I thought we'd be safe here. A twang of guilt shot through my heart. I'd been right to bring the women here. I'd been wrong to think Nathaniel was invincible. He wasn't. He was still a mortal man, with magic that could heal and help the sick. He'd protected me in the past, but it seemed that when the power of the whole blood ring came to bear, even the perfect warlock faltered. I turned to face my mate, a lump in my throat. I'm so sorry. She pulled a warm sweater over her head that was 3 sizes too big, and tugged it down over her thin frame. I'm going to use your words and throw them right back at you. You never get to apologize, Shadow. For anything to do with this. You saved my life, my soul, my baby. It's not your fault, and it's not Nathaniel's either that the vampires want me so much. I narrowed my eyes. Did you know that your blood is considered one of the rarest in the world, at least for vampires? She stared straight back at me. I didn't even know vampires liked witch blood until I was in the underground, or I would never have come to this horrible city. Because from the moment they bit me, they went bananas. They almost killed me so many times because they took too much from me. I never really knew why they did it so much to me, and not the others. But they killed other girls they brought into the underground too, so no, I didn't realize. At all. I could see it in her eyes, those gorgeous blue eyes that were beginning to swirl with purple magic, that she was now realizing the full truth. So, what do you want to do? I asked her. She glanced down at her bare feet. I want to grab a pair of shoes, preferably a pair I can run in, and I want to make a break for it. We have to do what Nathaniel asked us to do, lure the vampires away, and hope it's enough so they leave the hospital alone. I nodded, absorbing everything she was saying. There are a lot of magical people here. She snorted. There are. A practical buffet for the vampires. Now you've had the snake potion, that might make our escape faintly easier, I said, hoping I was right. She nodded. Exactly. So hopefully they won't smell me like they did before. I checked my watch and sighed. It's just gone 6. We've got about 2 hours of daylight left, then the city will be swarming with vampires. Vampires could daywalk as they'd adapted to the modern world well, but there was a payment for such a thing. They were weaker, and the strongest vampires were those who adhered to the nighttime routine they were designed for. Then we need to leave as soon as possible, Katie said, rounding the double bed and standing before me. She was looking better than I'd seen her so far. Her cheeks were flushed and full, her eyes sparkling with magic and health. But she was still very thin and seemed fragile. She put both hands on her hips and glared at me. I'm not as weak as I look. And we need to go, for the sake of all the others. We need weapons, I said. We need... I've got some for you, Nathaniel said from behind me. He was standing in the doorway, arms full of knives and guns. I lifted an eyebrow at him, feeling guilty about throwing us to the wolves. It was a low blow considering the man had saved Katie's life, but I didn't like being told we had to leave the only safe place in the city. Nathaniel shrugged. Yeah, I am. He dumped the weapons on a nearby gurney and marched off. I sighed and pressed 2 fingers into my forehead, forcing myself to think, and fast. Where could we go? My place. Too dangerous, and it was partly underground, which Katie was sure to hate. Sadie's apartment. Not safe enough. The workshop. I shook my head. There was only one safe place, and that was wherever Katie had come from. I whirled around. Where's your home again, Katie? Canada, up near Whitehorse. I grinned at her. Where there's sunlight 24 hours a day. In summer, yeah. In winter it's practically 24-hour darkness. Yet the vampires didn't go there. Interesting. We need to get you out of this city, out of the state. And get you home. She took a step closer. You're coming with me though, right? I grinned at her. Yes. How did I tell this woman I was never leaving her side? It still sounded like a completely foreign idea to me, and I was a shifter who believed wholeheartedly in the fated mates concept. Let's get suited up then. From the collection of weapons Nathaniel had dumped for us, I strapped knives to my thighs and put a gun holster over my shirt. When she didn't move, I handed her a dainty little dagger. If you aren't comfortable carrying a weapon, at least strap this to your ankle. Just in case. I hated the idea that we were going to have to fight our way out of the city, but it would be worth it to get Katie to safety. She took the dagger and strapped it to her calf. I grabbed a jacket from the wardrobe and pulled it on over my gun holster, leaving it unzipped in case I needed to get to the gun easily. I checked the bullets before I loaded up. Silver with a core of wood. Perfect vampire killers, presuming there weren't too many of them coming after us. I grabbed her hand, my heart pounding like a bongo drum in my chest. Come on. We better go. We exited the hospital room, looked left and right down the hallway, and headed toward the main exit. Nathaniel darted from one of the rooms, cutting us off. They're trying to break in. I suggest you head out the staff exit, then I'm going to lock the place down for as long as I can. I didn't ask any questions about the whys or hows, or if there was enough food for them to survive if he did manage to hold them off for a while. I just said, show us where it is and we'll leave now. Nathaniel nodded, pushed past us and started running in the opposite direction. Through the hospital, down a hall and up some stairs. We followed him through a maze of hallways I'd never seen before, then through a thick door that led into a house. We were suddenly surrounded by exposed brick walls, windows that looked out on a normal city street, and a nice, homely hallway. Where are we? I asked, confounded. This did not look at all like part of the hospital. My home, Nathaniel said. Which I fully expect them to find and destroy very soon, but at the moment it's the only way out other than the main entrance where they've congregated. A wave of gratitude washed over me. If this was the last time I would see Nathaniel, I couldn't leave things as they were. Angry. Hostile. I extended my arm and shook his hand. Thank you, my friend. I won't forget what you've done for Katie. For us? He grinned at me. Godspeed, Shadow. If you ever come back to the city, look me up. I nodded. Will do. I grabbed Katie's hand, and Nathaniel pointed up the hallway. The front door is that way. As soon as you get out of here, start running north and don't look back. Katie launched herself at him, hugging him tight. Thank you for everything. I'm so sorry I brought so much trouble with me. Nathaniel glanced at me with an apologetic look in his eyes as he pulled out of Katie's embrace. I am assuming that you don't need my help with your pregnancy anymore. You're going to keep the baby? She glanced at me, then nodded. Yes. Shadow told me he would look after us. Nathaniel's grin was big and bright. He will. He's a good man. I'm glad you found each other. A loud crash came from behind us, back down in the maze of hallways where we'd come from. Nathaniel jumped. I better go. Hold on, Katie said, grabbing for Nathaniel's hand. White magic flowed through their shared grip. Nathaniel's eyes widened, then he tugged his hand back. You need that for yourself. Tendrils of purple magic moved through Nathaniel's eyes again. You need it too, Katie said with a smile. And thanks to you, I'm growing stronger by the minute. There was another loud bang from behind Nathaniel, and he started to back away. Go. Katie urged. Seal yourselves in. We'll see you when everything settles down. Nathaniel nodded once, turned tail, and disappeared back the way we'd come. I grabbed for my mate's hand again, and tugged her toward the entrance to Nathaniel's house. That was good of you to give him some of his magic back. She shrugged. Without him I'd be dead. I pulled open the large wooden front door, and we burst out onto the street. It turned out we were right in the middle of downtown. That meant we had about 10 miles before we'd be able to reach the edge of the city, which we wouldn't be able to do on foot, not in 2 hours, and not with a swarm of vampires chasing after us. Do you have enough magic to get yourself out of the city? I asked, hoping she was one of those witches who could teleport. No. Then let's start running, I said, pulling on her hand. We started jogging down the street. I'll think of a plan on the way. She didn't answer me, but she was right beside me as we hot-footed it through the city. I knew every street, every alcove, every shadow in this damn place. But as the sun began to lower and red hues cast themselves across the sky, the snarl of angry vampires reached my ears. We were about to be in a hell of a lot of trouble.
Chapter 9. Katie. My chest tightened with fear as the sky grew darker. My body hurt like it had never hurt before. We'd run for what felt like miles, and we were still within the darkened streets of this seemingly never-ending city. We stopped at a crossroad and I bent over, pushing my hands against my thighs as my legs wobbled. I had the worst stitch in my side. Every breath I took was agony. I can't keep running like this. I panted, pushing myself to stand up and inhale as deeply as possible. My heart was going to give up at this rate. I've barely moved from a bed in years. I can't. Shadow nodded. I know. We need a place to hide until morning. He looked around us, I assumed to get his bearings and work out where we could go. I think I have a place. It's about 2 blocks over. Can you make it? If it was guaranteed, I could lie down at the end of this run? Absolutely. Yes. I think I can. I could feel the magic coming back, and my baby was safe within me. That in itself gave me the strength to keep going. I would rebuild myself into the person I'd been before, but even stronger. We just had to survive this night. Follow me, Shadow said, and I did. Just as I had been for the hours we'd been running through the city. Shadow's spine was straight, his limp unnoticeable as he continued to run down the street, turn left, then bolt across a road. He looked strong and healthy, which according to him wasn't normal. Which also meant that whatever Nathaniel had given him, magic-wise, was working. And it also made me think about what I could do, long-term, to make him feel like this. Strong. Free of the pain that had obviously plagued him all his life. When we finally reached an old ramshackle house, we stopped. I wheezed through my aching throat. Is this it? He nodded, breathing hard. It's abandoned, and protected with magical charms like the hospital. I've hidden people here before. Okay, I panted. Let's go. Before I fall down and can't get up again. As Shadow pushed open the gate in the white picket fence, it fell off its hinges. He sighed and dropped the gate to the ground. Come on. He grabbed my hand and tugged me down the beaten path and up to the front door. There could be other people in here, hiding or whatnot. Just ignore them and we'll find a corner for ourselves. I nodded, not knowing anything about this world, so I decided I was 100% going to trust Shadow on everything. He opened the door, which was unlocked, and closed it loudly behind us. Inside the house was a mess, with threadbare furniture and the smell of urine permeating the air. It was a familiar scent, unfortunately. The vampire lair had been pungent, with the smells of the women around me. Let's try the bedrooms, Shadow said, leading me through what used to be a lounge room and down a hallway. He seemed to know the layout well, and I could feel the tingle of magic in the air. It wasn't strong, and I didn't believe it would stop a vampire if they came to attack us now, but it was ever present, and I had to believe Shadow when he said we would likely be safe here. At least for a short time. He hadn't led me wrong yet. The first bedroom we opened had several people inside, huddled on the bed. Their eyes glowed in the dark room and my heart leapt. Shadow shut the door again without saying anything, and tried the next bedroom. There was a bed shoved into one corner, and little else. Hello? Shadow called out, but when no one moved to indicate there was life in the room, we stepped inside. Shadow shut the door behind us, then crept around the room, checking under the bed and behind the curtain. I put my hand to my stomach, worried about the baby. The pregnancy made me more of a target for recapture, but the more I considered it, the more I was determined to protect my child. But, did protecting my baby mean getting rid of it before the vampires could take and torture it? My thoughts were all confused. I had to talk to Shadow about it, given he had offered to support us. Do you think the baby will be safe where we're going? If the vampires catch us, the baby has no chance, except to live a life of torture, pain, and terror. Would it be better to just get rid of the baby? Now? Shadow stopped his investigating and whirled around, his eyes flashing silver in the darkness. I tilted my head, wondering about his shifter mix. You never answered my question fully. You're part wolf shifter, snake shifter, and warlock. What else is in there? He inhaled sharply. A small amount of fox shifter and some hair as well. A hare? Like a wild rabbit? His nod was more of a jerk. Yes. I think the hair, in combination with the snake, is what gave me my spinal deformity, so I'd wish it away if I could. But back to you. What do you mean get rid of the baby right now? Isn't that dangerous? No more dangerous than waiting for a vampire to come here and kill us, or capture us, which would be even worse. When they find out I'm pregnant, they'll wait until I give birth, then take the baby to steal its blood too. They might even kill him or her, but not before they torture it. Hurt it. I heard that happens a lot with vampires that can't control themselves. I can't have that. Wouldn't it be better just to end it now? I didn't know where I got the confidence or strength to say such a thing, but the adrenaline was pumping hard. I didn't want to be the reason Shadow was killed, and if I wasn't pregnant, I could fight. Shadow held out his hand. Come here. I walked forward on legs that were like jelly, took his hand and leant against him. Can we sit down? I asked. He groaned, falling onto the mattress. Let's lie down. I nodded and lay with him on the cold, thin blankets. The smell was musty, but I didn't care. I had Shadow's warm arms around me, and my body could finally rest after our dash through the city. Now, Shadow began, tracing a pattern on my arm. What were you saying? I took a deep breath and sighed. Did we really need to go through it again? I have enough magic to end the pregnancy, I think. It will leave me pretty weak, but at least if they catch me, they won't have my child too. There was quiet in the darkness as Shadow absorbed my words. So, you want to protect your child? Tears burned my eyes and I took another slow deep breath, willing them away. I didn't need to be crying again. That didn't help with anything. Yes. Of course. It's a precious gift. He pulled me closer so I was lying half on him now, my head on his chest, hearing the steady sound of his heart beating beneath my ear. It sounds like you want to keep your baby safe, not lose it, Katie. The burning in my eyes was back, but I refused to pay it any heed. Of course I do. But it's not safe, Shadow. To keep it isn't safe for any of us. And what are we going to do, even if I can get to safety? Find my family after all this time? Who's going to look after us? Protect us from the vampires that will come looking for us? I can't go back. And I won't let them take my baby. I won't. I shook my head, biting my lip painfully to stop any tears from falling. Nathaniel had said that my child was still young enough to terminate successfully. I didn't have much time before we crossed over the line, and the spell would surely kill both of us. I sat up, determination gripping my insides. I'd do this for my baby, and for Shadow. He wouldn't have to raise a baby that wasn't his. If he still wanted me at the end of all this, then at least I'd only be one person to look after. Not two. Shadow's hands clamped down on my arms like a vice. I glanced his way. What's wrong? Can you really do it yourself? Any time? His voice wavered, as though he was upset about something. I can now that I have my powers back. Shadow didn't reply. I couldn't work out what had gotten him so upset. I'll be okay. The most important thing is that my baby won't end up in the vampire's hands, and that you will. Be happier if I get rid of this thing that isn't yours. I hated thinking about my baby, like it was an unwanted parasite growing inside of me. But I steeled myself against the softened feelings. I will what? His voice was low. Well, you know. I swallowed hard. This baby isn't yours. That has to be hard for any man to accept, especially one with our connection. He rolled on top of me, pressing his hands down into the mattress on either side of my head, his heavy weight bearing down on me. I can't tell you what to do with your body, he said, groaning as though he was in pain, his face twisting. He could. I'd do anything for him. But I didn't understand his point. He rolled off me but stayed pressed against my side, one arm slung over my waist. Do you actually want to get rid of the baby? Or are you doing it because of the vampires? And because it's what you think I want? You don't want that? I want what makes you happy, Katie. You make me happy, I whispered. I still didn't understand this conversation, and I wanted him back on top of me. I needed the closeness to push away the lonely, cold feeling swamping me. Shadow growled, his wolf obviously becoming impatient. I'm just going to say it, out loud. I don't want you to get rid of the baby. If you need to, that's your decision, always. But you should know that I don't want you to. You don't? I gaped at him. Had I heard him right? He glanced down, avoiding my gaze. And you should know that I can't have any. Which means, I can't give you another child if you lose this one. You can't? I repeated, my heart feeling tight in my chest. I got myself fixed a long time ago, he said, though it looked like the last thing he wanted to admit. My genetics are too twisted. The pain. I couldn't inflict that on a child of mine. I couldn't. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry you felt like that was your only option. He pressed his lips into a thin line. I never thought it would really be a problem. I never expected to have a fated mate, nor find anyone who would fall in love with me. I turned on my side and reached for his face. It was probably too early to tell him how much I already loved him. I was still getting used to the idea myself. So, you want me to keep the baby? Even though it's not yours? He nodded fiercely. I do. And when it's born? What if you hate it? Hate me for birthing it? He leaned down and pressed his lips to mine. I could never hate you.
Chapter 10. Shadow. How could I make her understand? The words I was saying were being wrenched from my lips. I had no control over them. But I had to get them out. If she destroyed this baby, she would destroy herself. I could tell. She was already in love with the tiny being, and I was as well. I'll love the baby like my own, I swore against her lips. You have my word. To prove my point, I slid down the bed, pulled up the oversized shirt from the hospital, and pressed my lips to her belly. I felt more than heard Katie's sob, and I hoped it was one of relief rather than sadness. Is this all right? I asked, after a minute or so when she didn't push me away. God, yes, she whispered. The only place the vampires touched me was my veins. It was calculated and cold. I ached to feel like a human again, Shadow. Like this. Warmth and passion. Are you sure? She pushed my head back down to her chest. Will you make love to me? I'd love to. I thrust against her. Are you strong enough? She nodded. Definitely. God, I love you, she whispered. She loved me. My heart broke and remade itself twice as big. Afterward, I collapsed on top of her, breathing hard. She stroked my hair and held me to her chest, and I didn't try to move away. Did I hurt you? I asked, lifting my head. She laughed, a soft, breathy sound. Not unless you count the out-of-body experience I just had. That was amazing. Thank you. She tugged on me to lie down again, and I let myself rest on her. I'd never been able to relax around anyone before. Not like this. We were in the middle of a war zone, trapped in a house by the darkness and the vampires that hunted us, and yet I'd never felt so free. So at peace. I let my eyes close, and settled into my pain-free body in a way I could never usually do. A part of my brain was always working on shutting down the pain in my spine or in my leg. A part of my brain always wanted to be somewhere else. Not this time. Every part of me was happy, totally in accord with this person we were sharing the moment with. Did you really mean what you said about the baby? She whispered, sounding almost afraid to ask the question. That you want to keep it? I nodded against her. I do. Her whole body hummed with a happiness I could feel as if it were my own. I'm so relieved, she said. I really want this baby. I love it already. I know. I could sense that, I said. And I'm glad. She kissed my head and I lay my hand against her belly, which was beginning to swell with a subtle curve. Do you want a boy? Or a girl? I found myself asking. She chuckled, hugging me tight. I don't care. As long as they're happy and free. Powerful too would be nice, so they can blast the shit out of anyone who tries to hurt them. I laughed at the imagery, and propped myself up on my elbow so I could look down at her. I hope they have your face, I said, sweeping my fingers down her cheek. Your heart. I pressed my hand to her chest over the beating organ we gave claim to, driving the tender feelings in a person. I swallowed hard as emotion clogged my throat. Thank you for dealing with my shifters coming out like that. I usually have more control. I'll try to make sure it doesn't happen again. She shook her head and reached up to cup my face. Whatever your ancestry, I love you. Your scales, your howl, your insane feelings that you aren't good enough. I accept all of it, just as I hope you'll accept me for all the things I bring with me too. Of course I do. She smiled up at me. You've never had anyone love you for just you before, have you? Her question took me aback. Well, my parents were pretty good people, but I never really felt like I fit in with them, so I moved here. To this city. And my Uncle Jack, Sadie's dad, gave me a job. And my life just kinda went from there. She shook her head. You didn't answer my question. I regarded her for a long moment, then in a rare moment of clarity, answered her honestly. No. I haven't. She smiled up at me, then rolled onto her side, sticking her ass back so I could spoon her. I cuddled into her back and held her tight against me. She pulled the old blanket up over us and sighed as we settled together. Well, you have now. I closed my eyes, but didn't allow sleep to claim me for a long time after Katie fell asleep. I'd never been afraid to die. I'd always believed no one would miss me when I was gone, and with death would come a peace I'd never known in life. But not now. I didn't want to die. I was actually afraid to leave this beautiful creature, and the child she offered me. The future that beckoned. I had to get her out of the city. Her life and mine depended on it.
Chapter 11. Katie. Waking up, wrapped in the heat of my mate, was a dream come true. No, it was even better. I'd never even dared to dream that a moment like this could exist, not even before the underground. I took my time, absorbing the moment. Heat rushed to my eyes, and for once I did not fight the emotion. Only a few days ago I'd been lying on a bed in my own filth, strapped to a machine that literally drained the blood from my body. They left me with only just enough to survive. The pain had gone a long time ago. But the weakness, the depression, was ever present. I'd wanted to die. Prayed for it. Now here I was, my lover's hand pressed against my growing belly. A man who claimed I had been sent to him by fate. His soulmate. A man who was doing everything in his power to protect us. He was mine. To say I was grateful would never be enough. Shadow shifted on his side of the small bed, rolling even closer. He wanted me. He needed me. Just as I needed him. The other thing that had me excited this morning was something I hadn't felt in so long. My magic was truly returning. Yesterday I'd felt its presence, but only after Nathaniel had worked on me 3 times. Part of me had assumed that once his magic wore off, I'd be like a used battery in need of a recharge, unable to power up on my own. But I'd been wrong. This morning I felt strong. Stronger than I could remember being, even before the vampires had taken me away. I wasn't sure if that was my memory playing tricks on me, or if the small amount of magic I felt this morning was giving me some sort of high. "Good morning," Shadow whispered into my ear before rolling over to groan and stretch out his body. He was so beautiful. I loved everything about him. The way his hair fell over his eyes. The shine of the faint scales on his skin in the light. His tenderness. His strength. His courage. His patience. I was one lucky woman. "We'd better get moving," Shadow said. He gave me a quick kiss on the lips, then slid off the bed to grab his clothes from the floor. "I can't believe we were safe here all night," I said, following his lead and reaching for my own clothes. I still wasn't particularly self-conscious about my nakedness. It just wasn't a concern for me. But as we became more intimate, I wanted Shadow to think well of me. I pulled on the huge shirt Josie had given me, and the jeans that were baggy, but at least they didn't fall down when I ran. Which I assumed we'd be doing a lot more of today. "So? What's the plan?" I asked, the nerves working their way back into my belly. "We need to jack a car and get out of the city and across state lines if we can." I nodded. Great. Committing a felony was on my to-do list today. "Do you think getting to your parents is the way to go?" Shadow asked. I shrugged. I have no idea. It's been years. I think. I still can't tell how long I've been down there since I saw them. I honestly don't know. And it's a long drive. It will take us a week to get there by car. I'd flown down for college, then been kidnapped within 2 days. I had no idea how we'd get there, if we had to drive. He pressed his lips together. I think it might be smarter to head home to my parents' place then. My heart jumped in my chest. "You want to take me home to your parents?" He grinned. "Of course. They live in a community where there are a lot of witches and warlocks still around. They are mostly masked to vampires because of the mix of reptile shifter genes within our lines, but I think you'll be comfortable there." "But your work, your business?" He'd built a life for himself here. Wasn't he worried about leaving any of it behind? He shrugged. "The only important thing to me is you. And your baby." I wanted to correct him and say, Our baby, but until the child was born and I could hand him or her to Shadow, it would be my baby. Okay. Let's do it. Shadow nodded, pulled on his boots, and looked out the window. It's still early. By looking at the position of the sun, I'd say it's about 7 a.m. We should get going before it gets busier. We snuck out of the room and headed to the front door. Shadow pressed his ear to the door and stayed there. Hear anything? I asked, though I wasn't sure what he would be listening for. He pulled away. No. I think the wards are still in place, so we should be all right to leave. I clapped my hands, my gut twisting. Let's go steal a car. He rolled his eyes but grinned at me. Let's go. He opened the front door and kept me behind him. Then once he'd looked left and right, he took my hand and we hurried along the path. Don't run, he said. We don't want to attract attention. Like yesterday? I asked. He nodded. It was busy then. There's no one around at the moment, and we'll stand out like no one's business. We made it 1 block before a vampire walking down the street spotted us. He had bright red eyes and stopped walking to stare at us. Shadow froze, tensed up, and then pulled me across the road and down an alleyway. We came to a dead end. What do we do? I asked, looking back in the direction we had come. He opened a door I hadn't even seen, hidden in the brickwork. In here. He got in first, then pulled me inside. The space was tiny and dark, but as Shadow pulled the door shut, I pressed myself against his chest, closed my eyes, and tried not to think about the fact I was locked in a room smaller than a jail cell. What is this place? I whispered, not sure if anyone would be able to hear us from the outside. It's a hiding hole, Shadow said, and I wanted to laugh. Did people just name exactly what something did, rather than come up with anything original or fun? Shadow continued. They're all over the city. Strongly warded against vampires. We'll stay here for a little bit, then we've got to find a car I can steal. I nodded. Shadow's hands shook as he stroked my hair. Are you okay? I whispered. Yeah. It's just the nicotine withdrawal. Normally I'd be a shaking mess by this point, but since Nathaniel took all my pain away, I don't really need them. So he used smoking for pain management? Good to know. Just another reason to use my magic in the future to keep him healthy, and out of the crippling pain he'd endured all his life. I'm glad you're feeling better. Shadow chuckled. I keep waiting for it to wear off. I've never gone this long without pain. It's strange to say the least. I nodded, but didn't say anything. I reached down into myself and felt for my magic. It was there deep down in my soul, growing stronger with every passing minute. Shadow pushed open the door behind me. Hopefully he's gone by now. Let's take a look. I turned around. The vampire wasn't gone. He stood a few feet away down the alleyway, staring straight at me. He grinned when we appeared, his wickedly sharp teeth making my stomach twist. Shadow slipped around me, and with deadly efficiency pulled the knives from his thigh holsters and cut the vampire's throat. The vamp froze in place, swaying on his feet as he stared blankly at us while black oozed out of his wound. Then Shadow swung the blades once more, decapitating the vampire. My mouth dropped open. Wow. Let's run, Shadow said, and we bolted along the alleyway. Where there's one, there'll be more. We rounded the corner and ran straight into a swarm of vampires. 4 of them. The creatures spun around to face us, eyes glowing red. Holy shit. I stared as they circled around us, their eyes wild, their movements deliberate. Shadow nudged me. Katie. Run. But there was nowhere to run, except back the way we'd come. Leave the girl and go, one of the older vampires said to Shadow, his English accent similar to one of my captors. I shuddered. Not a chance, Shadow said. Without warning, the vampires lunged at us. Hands grabbed me. Shadow yelled out. They dragged me away. I fought against their hold, twisting and squirming as I screamed. They pulled me farther away from Shadow. I reached for him, until the vampires closed around me, blocking my view of him. My magic surged up inside of me, then it was dark. One of the vampires had thrown something over my head. I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. Hands dragged at me, pulling me down and away from Shadow. I tried to fight them, but my arms wouldn't move. I couldn't even scream now. When I heard Shadow's pained cries, I knew they'd hurt him. But how bad was it? Could he survive an attack of this magnitude? I reached for my ankle, wanting the knife I had strapped there. I was picked up and swung over someone's shoulder. Then they were running, carrying me away. Away from Shadow. Away from freedom. No. I sobbed, pulling at the sack on my head, but it wouldn't come off. So, I tugged at it long enough to create a bubble in front of my face, so I could breathe. I beat at the back of the man holding me, but he didn't even seem to notice. I was captured once again. I was going to be thrown into the underground, and my baby was going to be stolen from me. Killed or drained. Just like I would be. I swallowed the sob that rose. No one was going to save us now. And if they killed Shadow, I'd find some way to escape, and then I'd channel all my rage right back onto those vampire bastards. I was done lying back and being a victim. The first chance I got, I was going to save myself and my defenseless baby. And then I would exact revenge for whatever they had done to my mate.
Chapter 12. Shadow. Teeth ripped into my flesh, but soon enough the vampires began to choke and cough and spit out the blood they'd sucked into their mouths. Not only was my scent off-putting to them, but from what I'd gathered from the few vamps I'd talked to over the years, my blood was practically poisonous to them. "What the hell are you?" one male vampire growled as he spat my blood onto the pavement beneath his feet. I staggered sideways, getting a wall behind my back. "You don't want to know." I held tight to the hilts of both knives. The vampires narrowed their eyes at me, sizing me up. I darted forward, slashing at the vampire who'd taken a chunk out of my arm. He ducked then slid sideways. This guy was fast. Or was I too slow? I couldn't tell. "Let's go," one of the other vampires said, and all of a sudden I was alone. They were gone, and they'd taken my mate with them. I sagged against the wall, blood dripping down my shirt and running along my arm. I glanced down at the wound in my leg, pain throbbing through me. Shit. The bloody vamp had taken my flesh down to the bone. I put a hand over the wound and limped to the road. I needed help. Now. I put up my hand and one cab drove right on past. "Fine then," I muttered. They wanted to play it like that. I didn't have time to wait my turn. I stepped onto the road and turned toward the oncoming traffic. "Stop," I said, though the driver wouldn't be able to hear me, and the cab ground to a halt a few feet from my aching legs. He beeped his horn loudly and hung out his window. "What the hell are you doing?" I limped around to the passenger side and pulled open the door. "I need your help." "There's a fee for bleeding all over the back seat," the cab driver said, a snarl written all over his face. "Take me to Hunter's. I'll pay the fee." Jack's business was the only safe place I could think of. Sadie was hopefully now out of the underground, safe and secure. One of the last things she'd said to me before we went down was that she'd left everything to me. Her dad's business, his apartment. Everything. I'd been totally unprepared for such a thing when she'd announced it, and I'd told her I didn't want it. I wasn't someone who really cared about money or luxuries. But in this moment, I was grateful to my cousin. At least I had a place to go that would provide me enough time to stitch up this wound. Then I had to work out how to get Katie back. The driver and I sat in silence for the 20 minutes it took to get to Hunter's. I threw too much cash at him as I got out of the cab, but I knew how hard the smell of blood was to get out of small spaces like cars. "Thanks." I stumbled out of the car and found Hunter's lock. Of course it was still early. I used the code Jack had given me years ago to open the digital combination lock and pushed open the glass door, practically falling into the foyer. Then I went straight for the first aid room, stumbling through the door and looking for something to stem the bleeding. And fast. Hey, a male voice called out from the direction of the front door. Is anyone here? Shit. Should have thought about locking that when I came in. I considered hiding, then threw caution to the wind. I'm in the first aid room and I could use some help. A guy about 25 years old stood in the doorway. From the smell of him, he was some sort of wolf shifter, Jack's favorite. Your Shadow, right? I nodded, pulling bottles off the shelf, then finding what I needed. Yep. That's me. Can you help me out? Yeah. Of course. What do you need? Pour this onto my wound, then help me stitch it up. The guy came closer, took the bottle and whistled. This is gonna hurt like hell. I clenched my teeth and grabbed hold of the bench. Do it. A credit to him, the young guy didn't hesitate. He just poured the solution over my arm and shoulder. I groaned and inhaled sharply through my nose as a wave of pain swept over me, making darkness flash behind my closed eyes. I forced my eyes open as the pain began to recede. Then he threw the rest of the solution on my leg. I almost passed out. Harden up, you pussy. Do you know where everyone is? He asked. I forced my eyes open. What's your name? Joseph. But you can call me Joey. Fine. Joey. Sadie's left me in charge until she gets back. She and her mates have left for a while. Really? How come? I shook my head, staggering over to a chair so I could sit down. My legs weren't holding me up very well at the moment. You don't want to know. Just trust me when I say I'm in charge. And I need your help with this. Joey tilted his head to the side as though assessing me for my trustworthiness. Then he shrugged. Okay. He stitched me up, finding more bites on my arms than I'd realized, and dosed me with a different potion. When I'd finally stopped bleeding, I staggered to my feet. I need some food, and I need a plan to get Katie back. The pain in my body was already disappearing, which was plain strange. I had to assume that Nathaniel's magic was at work again. Who's Katie? The front door opened. I hobbled over to the hallway to see 3 more guys come in. Fridge and Rogan must have assumed they'd be back working today, and hadn't told any of their guys that the workshop would be closed. Hey Shadow. One of the hunters called out, and as he got closer I recognized him. Hey Taylor. I held out my hand to the wolf shifter, but instead of shaking it he only gaped at my blood-covered arm. What the hell happened to you? Vampires. Taylor TSKED. Bastards. He looked around the room and frowned. Where's Sadie and Rogan and Fridge? I took a deep breath. They left me in charge. Taylor's eyebrows flicked up. Are they okay? We broke into the underground yesterday. You what? Another guy asked, walking up to our group. I didn't like crowds and I didn't like to be in charge. There was a reason I worked for myself. By myself. But Sadie had wanted me to look after my uncle's business, and I would help her if I could. We broke into the underground, and rescued the witches they had locked down there. The guy who joined us, another wolf shifter with orange-red hair, ran to the door, shut it, and locked it. Then he ran back and stared at me with an excited look on his face. So what happened? I swallowed, hating the way they were all looking at me, but knowing I had to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight for this. For Katie. For my mate. Travis, Tony and I grabbed 3 of the witches and took them straight to a secret hospital I know. But the vampires came and took my witch off me. I swallowed the acid that rose in my throat, anger eating at me. What about Fridge? Joey asked. And the rest of them? I don't know, I said honestly. Sadie told us to leave. She stayed to look for her mom. Her mom? Joey repeated, his mouth dropping open. I nodded. I don't know if they found her or if they got away. The red-headed guy pulled out his cell phone. I got a message this morning from Fridge, but haven't checked it yet. Hang on. He tapped on the screen then grinned. They made it out. They're hiding. And he said Shadow's in charge. He lifted his gaze to mine, and I held up a hand. I'm Shadow. I'm Dakota, he said, but you can call me Dax if you want. I nodded. Great. Well, Dax, I think I need your help. A plan was beginning to form in my head, but I couldn't do this on my own. Dax and Joey nodded. What you need? Taylor crossed his arms over his chest. We're with you. I took a deep breath, then blew it out in a rush. I need to find Katie, the witch they took from me. Dax narrowed his eyes. You want to look for the vampires that took her? Yes. And I don't even know where to start. Dax shook his phone. Want me to call Fridge and find out what happened with them? Maybe they could give us a clue into how to find her. That's a great idea, I said. Dax grinned and headed off to the workout area to make the phone call. What do you want me to do? Joey asked, his eyes bright and alert. You're okay with hunting the vampires? I asked him. Most of the people who've gone after the blood ring haven't come back. Oh, I'm in, Joey said with the confidence of youth. I know a lot of the guys would be happy to join us. If there's money in it. I frowned. I have money. Quite a lot, actually. I didn't have many expenses, even with the regular amounts I sent home to help out my parents. Joey stuck out his hand. Then consider your bounty hunters hired. I reached out and shook his hand, noticing the way his gaze ran over my scaled hand and face. But the smile didn't dim. In fact, there was another light in his eyes now. I've heard of you, you know? The best PI in the city. The strangest of all the shifters. I heard you can kill anyone, even the oldest vamps, because you're so fast. Is that true? I chuckled, then coughed to clear my throat. No. I just stick to the shadows. People don't know me. He stared at me, then he shrugged. Well, it's still an honor, man. I mean, you're kinda a legend around here. You and your silver cigarette case. He frowned. You need a smoke? I've got some. Did I? I probed my mind, then shook my head. Nah. I'm okay for the minute. Thank you, though. Thanks to Nathaniel's magic, even my new injuries weren't bugging me now. Do you think you could contact other hunters and see who's in? Joey nodded. A few of the older guys won't want to take the risk, but I'm sure I can rope in at least a dozen. A dozen would be amazing. Great. Get them here as soon as possible to suit up. We're raiding the vault. I had access to everything, thanks Sadie. And we were going to need all the knives, guns, and stakes we could get. Joey clapped his hands together. Yes. I'll go make some calls. He pulled his cell out of his back pocket and saluted, before heading off to do his own research. Dax jogged back into the room. You'll never guess what happened. We all turned toward him, and Dax grinned as he began his tale. Sadie found her mom, and together, they practically blew up the underground yesterday. Killed one of the vampire fathers too. And I'm happy to report, they all got out safely. Just sweet relief coursed through me. My aunt, my cousin, and her mates were safe. And they'd taken out one of the most powerful vampires in the state. That could only mean good things for us. So that means they can't take Katie straight back to the underground. It's gone. Dax nodded. Yeah. And Fridge said that his vampire mate Vincent knew of some places we should check out. Where the vampire fathers live. He's messaging me a list, though I didn't quite get that part. Since when does Fridge like guys? I laughed. Dax was too young to understand the mate bond. A fated mate bond isn't something you can fight, though I'm pretty sure Fridge fought that one pretty hard. He's mated to both Sadie and Vincent in equal measure. Dax tilted his head, then shuddered like he couldn't think of anything worse than a fated mate. My heart twisted in my chest. That was exactly how I'd felt a few days ago, though secretly the loneliness would have slowly killed me. Dax's phone dinged and he lifted it up, turning to stand side by side with me so I could see the list of places Fridge recommended we check out. I forced myself not to move, though the close proximity of the other man made me a little nervous. I wasn't used to people wanting to be so near me. I scanned the list and tapped the screen. I know that place. One of the fathers lives there. In the penthouse. Then I'd say that's the first place we should look, Dax said, sliding his phone into his pocket. You got a team? A team? Yeah, it's gonna take a whole special ops unit to attack a vampire den. And if you expect to walk away with your witch, then we're gonna need men. I indicated the first aid area, where Joey had wandered off to make his inquiries. I think Joey's calling in some of the other hunters. Dax crossed his meaty arms over his meatier chest. We're gonna need a lot more than that. Don't you have friends? People you've worked with? Anyone who can fight, who'd like to take the vampires down? My mouth dropped open. Did I dare? I'd worked in this city for a decade. I did have contacts. People who owed me. Powerful people. Dangerous people. Did I dare call in every favor I was ever promised? For Katie, yes. I wouldn't hesitate. I nodded. I do. Give me a few hours and I'll get our army together. If we can attack before sundown, we'll have an advantage. Sounds good to me, Dax said. I walked upstairs to use Jack's computer and landline phone. I had an army at my disposal, and I'd never even recognized it. After tonight, the vampires would give me my witchmate back, or I'd burn the Blood World City to the ground.
Chapter 13. Katie. I was more furious than I'd ever been in my whole life. I wasn't scared like last time. Instead, I wanted to pound these vampires' faces into pulp with my fists. Thanks to Nathaniel's magic and his potion, none of the vampires who'd grabbed me had tried to bite me. They'd taken a whiff of my skin and shrunk away like I was poison. Good. That gave me more time to rebuild my strength and my magic. Shadow wasn't dead, I could feel it. I didn't really know how that was possible, but I could sense his presence deep inside me. Or at least, that was how it felt. I was sure I'd know if he was dead. I just had to stay alive long enough for him to rescue me. Again. Unless I could figure a way out of this by myself. Where am I? I asked, glancing around the fancy room they'd put me in. When they'd taken the hood off my head, I'd been shocked to find I was in a temperature-controlled, darkened bedroom. I could smell blood in the air. There were vampires around. But I wasn't back in the underground. In fact, from the looks of things, I was in a swanky hotel many levels up. Shut up, one of the male vamps said and turned his back on me. My stomach ached. Could I get something to eat, please? I asked as gently as I could. Feigning fear was the best way for them not to see me as a threat, though I was. I really was now. My baby and my love for Shadow gave me every reason to fight these vampires. My life was not forfeit. They would not tie me up and take my blood ever again. I said, shut up. The vamp whirled on me, his eyes angry and red. I sniffed and sobbed a little. Please. I need some water and some food. Please. The guy groaned as though I pained him and marched to the door, then slammed it shut once he left. I jumped up off the chair and raced to the window, throwing open the curtains. It was dusk over the city, the sun setting and casting hues of orange and red over the landscape. I couldn't see much from up here. The cars below looked like tiny ants zooming around the streets. We were definitely in a high-rise building. Looks like I'm going to be a meal for one of the fathers, I mused aloud. I hurried back to my chair just in time, as the vampire stormed back in with a bottle of water and a sandwich he'd obviously pulled from the hotel room fridge. Here. He shoved both at me. He wrinkled his nose as he got close to me, and I sent up a prayer of thanks to Josie and Nathaniel for their potion that made me smell like I had reptile blood. I was going to have to buy that by the truckload when I got out of here. And I would. I'd thought that when the vampires got me again, I'd be looking for the closest sharp object to throw myself upon, but now that I was in the situation, it was the opposite. I had a future to look forward to. A man who wanted me. A baby who needed me. These vampires had stolen years of my life, and they weren't going to take any more. I sipped my water and ate the gross sandwich, because I needed my strength when the moment came. The one I never got the last time they took me. When they'd grabbed me from the street last time, I'd frozen, terrified. I'd been bitten and drained to the point of passing out. When I'd woken up, I was underground, attached to tubes, and was too scared to fight back. When I finally realized that I needed to fight for my life, I was too weak. That wouldn't happen this time. The door opened, and an old vampire glided into the room. He drew close to me, then glared down. "You smell odd." I dropped my head and stared at my hands clasped in my lap. "Give me your wrist," he said. I didn't move. He grabbed for my hand and lifted it up to his mouth. I tried to fight a little, but I could feel how strong he was. He'd snap me in two if I fought too hard. He ran his teeth over the veins at my wrist, then bit down. I flinched, hating the tugging and pulling at my arm. I looked away, disgusted by the sounds he made. Moaning, thirsty, gobbling sounds. Then he detached and dropped my hand like it had offended him. I pressed my other hand into the 2 puncture wounds, hoping to stem the flow of blood. "You taste tainted. I can tell you're a witch, and a strong one at that. But your blood has been washed with something wrong. I will wait another day, then drink again." He turned and disappeared out the door. I gaped after him. That was it. He was testing me for my sweetness? And when he found that my taste appealed to him, what then? I glanced up at the vampire who'd given me the sandwich. What happens when he comes back and likes the taste of my blood? He stared at me, his eyes cold. "The Father will choose your path." I pushed to my feet, so I was eye to eye with the bloodsucker. But what are the options? Will he keep me here for a regular snack? Or what? Why wasn't I being transported straight back to the underground? What had happened to their operations down there? The vampire glared at me. "The Father will choose." I turned and walked away, because seriously, that was just a crap answer. The vampire didn't budge from his post. He was probably my bodyguard. "Can I have a shower?" I asked, then pointed at a door off from my room. "Is that a bathroom?" He nodded. "Thanks," I forced myself to say, then sashayed to the bathroom and shut the door. Once I was inside, my composure started to crumble, but I steeled myself against the feelings. "No," I whispered to myself. "You can fall apart after Shadow rescues you. Not now." I stripped off the dirty clothes and had a long shower. After all, it was going to take Shadow a while to find me, and the vampire father wasn't coming back for a day. What else should I do? I washed my hair by myself, aching for Shadow as I did it. Having him wash my hair and shower me had been so necessary at the time, and yet so sensual. So beautiful. I'd never thought a man could be so tender and tough, all at the same time. I scrubbed my hair, then found a brush in the pile of hotel-style bathroom products. It took me forever, or that was how it felt, to detangle my hair. In the end, I asked the vampire for some scissors and chopped half of my long hair off. It really was a caked, disgusting mess. When I was finally done, I swiped my hand across the steam-covered mirror and stared at myself. I looked better than I had yesterday, and the fact I'd been able to have such a long shower and was still standing was testament to how much stronger I was. My cheeks had filled out, and my eyes were no longer pools of dead nothingness. I clenched my jaw and ran my hands through my now shoulder-length hair. When we got out of here, I'd get a real hairdresser to fix it up, but for now, I felt so much cleaner and healthier. But I was exhausted. I wrapped one of the huge, fluffy towels around my body, then ventured back out into the bedroom and sat down on the bed. My bodyguard was still standing in the corner, looking as bored as ever. "Should I go to sleep?" I asked. "Or is there something else I need to do?" The vampire grunted at me, then nodded and left. He obviously found watching me a waste of his time. As soon as he left, I scoured the room for some clothes, finding only the complimentary robe. I wrapped myself in its fluffy depths. Oh my God, it was luxurious, which confused my body no end. I should be in full-on survival mode, and yet I found myself falling into a deep sleep, content with the knowledge that I would be safe soon enough. Shadow will be here soon. I woke to loud bangs and screams. My heart pounded and fear raced around my body. It was time. My mate had arrived.
Chapter 14. Shadow. I'd called in every favor, every marker, every debt. I had a menagerie of shifters, hunters and humans at my back, ready to fight to the death to find my mate. We decided to go straight to the place on Fridge's list I recognized, the hotel where one of the vampire fathers lived. I had to hope that's where they had taken Katie. If they couldn't use the underground to hide her, it stood to reason that they'd put her in the other safest place in the city. A high-rise building with an army of vampires to keep her from getting taken again. We stormed through the main doors and took out the security guard at the elevator. Then, as the two women behind the reception desk jumped to their feet and exposed fangs, Dax took them both out too. I hurried over to the elevators where the comatose security guard lay on his side. I lifted his lip to see the fangs protruding from his jaw. All vampires. I think we've got the right place. Dax hustled up next to me. The whole place could be crawling with them. I nodded, touching the silver stakes at my waist, ready and willing to take out as many as we needed to save Katie. Hey Shadow, Thomas said, creeping up next to me. He was part fox also and had a super fast mind. I'd saved him years ago from a group of vampires. He owed me, and he had a vengeful streak a mile wide. Perfect for this mission. Yeah, Tommy? I asked, watching our army pile into the ground floor, 26 of them in total, awaiting my command. I can work their computer system. Might be able to find the father for you. I nodded at him. The father will be in the penthouse, but if you can lock every door on every floor to keep all the other vampires trapped, that would be handy. And unlock all the doors on the penthouse floor, he asked, his eyes bright and alive with the excitement of the chase. I shoved at his chest and grinned at him. Yes. Smartass. Thanks. Dax grabbed the security vampire's tags and handed them to me. This should open the doors, elevator, and stairwells. I think. I grabbed it and went over to the pair of elevators. Some of you stay down here. Make sure no one comes in and for God's sake don't let anyone out. A couple of the hunters I'd brought with me grabbed two of the shifters. We can hold the fort down here. Dax headed to the elevator doors. Let's go to the penthouse. You sure she'll be up there? No. I don't know. But it's my best guess. I knew the fathers. I'd studied them over the years. Avoided them, fought their hired help. This wasn't going to be easy, but if we were fast, we might be able to get in and out with little to no injuries. Let's go, I said, swiping the card over the silver reader. The doors opened. We're with you, Dax said, as multiple hunters and shifters piled in. I swiped the card again and pressed Penthouse 1. But there was another button. Penthouse 2. Shit. The doors started to close. I slammed my hand between the doors and darted out to stop the other elevator. We need the card as well. The elevator won't work at all without it, Taylor said, holding out his hand. I handed him the card and said, you go to Penthouse 2. We'll go to Penthouse 1. You're looking for a witch, about 22 or so. Super thin. Taylor nodded, grabbing his gun. We'll see you afterwards. I rushed back to my elevator, and the doors dinged shut. I shuddered as we moved up, up, up. I hated these things. It was unnatural to be so far up in the sky. My hair shifter, my wolf shifter, my fox and my snake all hated it. And that was most of my blood. I closed my eyes and focused on the mission. What I was here to do. Save Katie. Kill vampires. That was all that mattered. The elevator climbed higher, the numbers above our heads growing, until finally the elevator rocked to a stop. I have no idea what's out there, I said to the 8 guys who'd piled into the elevator with me. Be ready for anything. I pulled the silver stakes from my thigh holsters and gripped them hard. My heart pounded, and the magic in my veins thrummed to the forefront. The elevator doors dinged open on penthouse 1. I launched forward, stakes raised, ready for action. There was nothing. We stood in a small, empty foyer with a single door. The guys piled out behind me. I crept forward until I was right in front of the door. I don't like this. One single point of entry and exit, I said. Dax called out. There's the emergency stairwell if we get stuck. Yeah, need to run down 30 flights of stairs, Alex said. Fun. I nodded. At least there's a second escape route, and with Tommy blocking all the other floors and doors, hopefully that means we won't be met with anyone on the lower levels. There was a soft thump from beneath my feet, and I realized the other guys had already breached level 2. We needed to go. Come on. I reached out for the handle, only to have the door swing open in my face. It was a vamp, not even looking our way, as he chatted to someone on the inside of the room. Then he turned to see us, and his mouth dropped open. What the? I didn't hesitate. I slammed the silver stake straight into his heart. He burst into flames, then crumbled to the carpet in a pile of ash. Screams erupted from within the apartment, and we stormed in. Human women sat in a row on the couches, ready to be fed from. 3 vampires stood around watching them. My army attacked like a swarm, using their knives and silver bullets to kill the 3 vampires. They corralled the screaming women who had all jumped up at our entrance, and now stood in a tiny circle flapping their arms. Do you ladies want to be here? I demanded. Or are we rescuing you too? Well, yeah, sort of, one of the blondes said. We chose to be here. I nodded at my guys. I didn't have time to process that. Leave them. I've got to find Katie. I dashed to a door off the room to find a bedroom. It was empty. I went to the next room. Also empty. Looking for this? A man said as he walked out of the next bedroom holding Katie against him, a knife to her throat. Bloody hell. I went still and quiet. This vampire held my life in his hands. My future. I would do anything he said if it meant saving Katie. But I also knew how to deal with people. Bullies especially. And showing weakness or fear was not an option. Let her go and we won't kill you, I said. The men around me moved in to circle the offending vampire. The vampire pressed the knife into her throat, making blood well and trickle down her neck. No closer. Stop, I said to the guys. They froze in place. Katie didn't say anything. In fact, she was so still, she didn't even look like she was breathing. Then she flicked her gaze toward me just for a second, and I saw something that surprised me. Anger. She was still alive, still fighting to be free, even if it didn't look like it to her captors. Thank Christ. The relief made me sag, and I slid the stakes back into their holsters. I tried not to think about it, but I'd been terrified about Katie's mental health and how she dealt with the fact that the vampires had captured her again. I'd been afraid she would hurt herself or worse. She'd always said she'd rather die than go back into the underground. Let her go, I repeated in my strongest voice. And you can leave. The vampire grinned. Once the fighting starts, mongrel. You're mine to kill. What? Then I felt him. The father. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and I turned to see him on the other side of the room. He moved into the room like a disease. Fatal slow. A destroyer. He stared at me with all-knowing eyes. They glowed red in his weathered head, his long silver hair flowing over his black robes. He looked like some aged helpless priest. He wasn't. He was the deadliest person here, and we needed to act fast. The time for games was over. Get him, I yelled. The hunters launched at the father vampire, daggers and knives drawn. The father moved like only an ancient vampire could, with lethal speed and perfect strength. He killed 2 of the men right in front of me, then moved around dispatching the other 5. I couldn't just stand there. The father had Taylor in his grasp. Taylor tried to get away, but the father's hold was too tight. He leaned down and chomped down on Taylor's throat. I swung one of my silver stakes into the side of the father's neck. The father growled and threw an arm out, sending me flying across the room and into a wall. The remaining hunter shot the father in the head, but the vampire took him out too. I groaned as I staggered to my feet and glanced over at my mate. The vampire still had her in his grasp, knife to her throat. How on earth was I going to save her now? I sucked my magic into my core, using it to strengthen my resolve. I gripped the remaining stake I had strapped to my thigh with my left hand, and pulled the silver knife from my belt with my right. My fastest weapon. When the vampire father came for me, I was ready. And he was injured. Black blood poured from his neck, and the hole in his face spoke of the gunshot wound. He needed to feed, and I dared him to come for me. I dropped my arms, feigning fright. He grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me toward him. I braced for the pain of his bite, and exulted in the groan of disgust as he tasted my tainted blood. He pulled up, his mouth open, my blood pouring from his lips like an open wound. "What are you?" "Not yours to eat," I growled and sliced his throat with my silver knife. As he gasped for air, I plunged my silver stake deep into his heart. The father fell backwards, but as he fell he swung at me, his talon-like nails slicing through my face. There was a loud thump as he hit the ground, but the damage had already been done. I screamed out from the burning pain and pulled away. I needed to kill him. He wasn't ashes yet. So, I reached for another stake I'd stashed at my calf, but as I gripped the hilt I didn't get time to use it. The vampire who'd been holding Katie threw her to the floor and lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. I could barely see, thanks to the poison in the vampire father's claws working through my system. The vampire pounded into my back, forcing me further into the ground. Then he kicked my ribs and I heard them break. He slammed his foot into my back again and again. I couldn't cry out. I could only reach out for my mate, who looked like she'd fainted away on the floor. When the vampire pulled my head back to reveal my throat, Katie's eyes popped open. She was on her feet in an instant, her eyes flashing with rage. Silver glinted near her hand. She'd grabbed the small dagger I'd given her. The vampire stood up and turned to her. With one smart, fast move, she shoved the dagger into one of his eyes. The vampire screamed. I slid my second silver dagger along the carpet toward Katie. She ducked down, grabbed the dagger, and thrust it straight into the vampire's heart. My heart pumped so fast it sounded like a steam engine, but at least I got the satisfaction of seeing him turn to dust before us. "We need to get out of here," she said, glancing down at the dead bodies around us. I nodded, pushing my hands into the carpet and forcing myself to my feet. "We do." The father I'd staked began to crawl along the carpet, hauling himself to his feet. "Oh my God," Katie whispered, then started pulling me toward the door. "Go," I told her. "I'll catch up with you." The pain in my body was indescribable. So much worse than anything I'd experienced before. "Go, Katie. Please." I waved at her as I hauled myself along the furniture, dragging my broken body toward the entrance. I wasn't going to make it, but I wouldn't give up trying. Go. All that mattered was that Katie and her baby got out of here. Her eyes flashed, and I knew she wasn't leaving me. "No," I whispered, dragging myself a little faster and swallowing the scream of pain as I moved. There was a cold breeze on my neck. The father was up and he was close. "Leave him alone," Katie yelled, then charged at me. "Who's going to stop me from killing him, little one?" "You," the father asked. I turned just far enough to see him looming behind me. "I wouldn't tease her if I was you," I said, blood spilling out of my mouth and onto my shirt. I wasn't going to make it. I just had to stay conscious for a little longer. Help Katie in any way I could. "Why not?" The vampire father tilted his head at me. "What's she going to do? Stop me before I take your head from your body?" "I don't think so." "Then I'm going to drain the witch just for vexing me." He reached for me, his cold undead fingers grabbing onto my shirt. I couldn't move. Couldn't respond, and yet everything began to change, moving in slow motion. The vampire grimaced, his sharp teeth flashing in the dim lighting. Then white light hurtled past me, meeting the vampire's flesh like the beam from a fog lamp. His flesh peeled off his bones, leaving little more than a skeleton. And then that too was gone. My mouth dropped open. The father had disappeared before my very eyes. I turned to see Katie standing beside me. Her arms were outstretched, fierce determination on her face. She glowed with a magic more powerful than any I'd seen before. I stared in wonder. In love. Then I hit the ground with a thump that felt like it cracked my skull. I was in a world of trouble. Go. Please. Save yourself, I whispered at my mate. She placed her beautiful hands down on my back and shushed me. Be still, she said. Breathe. And I'll heal you. I was far past healing or magic. And yet there was no choice but to lie still and let Katie attempt whatever she was trying to do. Save me, obviously. But how did she even have any magic left after dealing with the vampire father? That should have wiped her entirely. The pain in my ribs began to lessen, a soothing warmth spreading through my joints and bones. I was dying. I couldn't feel my body any longer. Katie, I said, turning my head to try and see her one more time. I love you. Everything went black and I died.
Chapter 15. Katie. Don't you dare die on me. I yelled at Shadow as he took a final breath. I screamed, standing up and forcing my arms out in front of me. This was not the time for my lover to die. No. I closed my eyes and drew on every bit of magic I had. I gathered every tiny shred of strength and love I had for Shadow, and I poured it all into the spell I worked over his broken body. I screamed as I dropped to the floor, pressing a hand to Shadow's back and feeling the softest amount of breath rising and falling from him. Help! I yelled, though to whom I didn't know. Everyone around me was dead, and I couldn't lift my arms now. The spell I'd used to kill the vampire father, followed by my attempt at healing Shadow, had taken every bit of magic I had. I was done for now. I let myself collapse, lying half across Shadow's back, my hand snaking across to lay over my rounded belly. Hopefully, I hadn't taken too much of my body's energy. It was still needed for my gorgeous little baby. But if I couldn't stand up, nor move from this spot, we were probably done for anyway. At least we're here together. The door flew open and men piled in. Holy hell, what just happened here? I lifted my head and stared at one of the men. He looked mostly human. Help, I whispered, trembling. The guys converged on me. Are you the witch Shadow was looking for? I nodded, and one of the big guys lifted me into his arms. We've got to get you out of here. I let my arm drop, pointing to where Shadow lay. He's alive. Get him. Please. Alex, grab Shadow, the guy said, his voice booming in the room. Check every man, carry who you can. But we're leaving in 3 minutes. There was a rush around the room, and my head started to spin. I made sure that the guys grabbed Shadow, then closed my eyes for the elevator ride down. We collected more soldiers who had been camped out in the basement, and headed out. Where to? One of the guys asked as they carried me through the streets. We're safe. The workshop? Another man offered. I had no idea what the workshop was, but if Shadow had brought these men with him, I had to trust them. They carried me to a cab, ordered the guy to take us to an address, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a large room with a whole lot of gym equipment. They placed Shadow in front of me on a red gym mat. His face was healed and he was no longer bleeding, but he wasn't waking up. We better set up a perimeter and stay here with them tonight, one of the men said. What about food? Another asked. Get some for the whole crew. Get some sleeping bags and shit too if you can. The words were rolling around me, and yet I didn't really understand what was going on. I crawled over to where Shadow lay on the floor mat and lay down beside him. I stroked his face, pushing the hair out of his eyes. Please wake up, I whispered. I can't do all this without you. Shadow didn't respond, and I pressed even closer, reveling in the beat of his heart. His breath on my face. He was alive. That was all that mattered. I'd find a way to get him well. I may have run out of magic for the moment, but I would recharge. I would grow in power again, and then I would heal him. I'd bring him back to me. And our baby. Katie. Shadow's whispered plea came out of nowhere, and had me sitting bolt upright. Shadow? Did you say something? He still wasn't moving. Was it my imagination? Or was it really possible that he was waking up? Then I saw it. The smallest of movements. His eyelids fluttered, then his lips pulled tight as he groaned and tried to move. Shadow. He nodded. Oh, thank God. I cried, throwing myself at him and pushing him onto his back so that I rolled on top of him. I had no magic left to help him, but I still couldn't help myself from asking, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" His arms moved slowly around me, and I pushed up with my weak arms to smile down at him. You're alive. He nodded slowly, staring up at me like he couldn't believe I was on top of him and we were both still breathing. What happened? He asked. I lifted a hand to wipe at the tears that were falling from my eyes, with no regard to my preference not to cry. I killed the vampire father, which felt so good, by the way. I slid down to sit beside him, but kept a hand on him at all times. It had felt amazing to kill that vampire. So good. I dreamt about being strong enough to kill them for so long. And now I was. I think I remember that part, Shadow said, one side of his mouth quirking up into a weak smile. Then how did we get back to the workshop? I grinned at him. These guys came storming in and carried us both home. Well, this place wasn't exactly home, but all the feelings inside this place were good, and I was comfortable to stay here. Maybe even forever. I kind of liked the idea of living in a place with weapons and an alarm system connected to the police. But Shadow stopped, then inhaled sharply. I thought I died. I felt dead. I shrugged. I wasn't ready to let you go. Shadow dragged himself up to sit next to me. You used all your magic to bring me back to life? Well, I'm not sure you actually died. I hadn't checked his heartbeat or his breathing. I just launched at his healing like a starving dog at a bone. But yes, I used my magic to heal you. How are you feeling? Shadow raised his arm and looked down at the flesh that had been mauled by a vampire. There was scarring and the flesh looked raw, but he still had an arm. And that was all that mattered. Did we really survive? Shadow whispered, then looked up at me. I didn't think I'd get out of there alive. My heart skipped a beat. But you came for me anyway. Of course I did, Katie, Shadow said. God, I love you. I leaned forward to kiss him. He sighed as our lips met, and I drew him even closer. We had survived an enemy that no one else in the city would have been able to vanquish. I felt quietly confident now that we would be able to do anything together.
Epilogue 6 months later. Shadow. I leaned forward in the director's chair and hung up the phone, mystified by Sadie's conversation. I shook my head. Another year. Really? Hey, sweetie. Katie called through the door just before she waddled in, her hand on her lower back. How's your day been? You shouldn't be up and walking around. I scowled at my mate before rushing around Jack's huge desk and grabbing for her hands. She lowered herself into the chair and rubbed her belly. I was due a few days ago, Shadow. I want this baby out of me. Now. Who was that on the phone? Katie asked. I thought I heard you talking to someone as I came up the stairs. I leaned back against the desk and crossed my arms over my chest. It was Sadie, actually. Oh? How is she? Very pregnant as well. Katie's eyebrows flicked up. And? When are they coming back? I got up from the desk and moved back to the director's chair, from where I'd been running hunters in Sadie's absence for the past 6 months. She said another year or so. Katie blinked, then ran her hand over her belly. Really? Well, that's unexpected, I suppose. I told her that we wanted them back to run the company, but her mom isn't doing so well, and they've decided to stay in the country. Katie flinched, but I assumed that was her back as always. She'd been uncomfortable for months now. Well, I can't say I blame her, Katie said. I can't imagine what Sadie's mom suffered being in the underground for almost 20 years. That's just insane. I nodded, my fingers aching for my small silver cigarette case. Thanks to my mate, who regularly used her magic to help me with my pain, I didn't need the hand-rolled cigarettes anymore. But sometimes I missed the habit. Are you okay? I asked my mate, who only nodded and waved for me to go on. Well, she said we should stay. Keep running the business, living in her dad's apartment. The whole lot. Did you tell her we preferred to live here? Katie asked with a grin. I shook my head. No. But that doesn't really matter. The most important thing is you and the baby are safe. I've had Jack's old apartment cleaned and renovated. Everything is super bright and light, and the windows are unbreakable. Even against a vampire. Katie grinned, then inhaled sharply. You sure you're okay? Katie jerked to her feet, a wet patch forming on her light blue maternity jeans. I stared at her. Had she just wet herself? My waters just broke. She gasped. I've been having cramps all day, but I didn't think it meant anything. Oh. I jumped to my feet and raced around the desk. You sure you want to go to Nathaniel's hospital? She nodded, breathing hard. Definitely. I owe that man a lot. And I feel safe around him. I was glad Nathaniel had moved into new premises. After he'd survived the vampire attack, he'd set up in a new part of town. A safer part, with even more magical backup. The other great thing that had changed about the city was that a lot of the vampires had moved on, and I hadn't heard anything about a new blood ring being set up. Between Sadie and Katie, 2 vampire fathers had been taken out, and no one could tell me if there were any others around. Without that protection and structure, a lot of the vampires had up and left, leaving us with a safer city, especially for my magical mate and her unborn child. You got your bags packed, right? I asked her, knowing the answer, but having a broken brain moment. She nodded, beginning to breathe deeper and slower. Yes. It's in our room. I'll get it. I raced out of the office and into the room next door. It had been an office once upon a time, but we'd reinforced the window with vampire-proof glass and set up our bed there. Neither Katie nor I needed a lot of space or material possessions, but we needed security and a window so she could see the stars. I grabbed the bag on the bed, already stuffed full of clothes and baby things. On top of the bag was a little potion bottle, and I palmed that to give to my mate. She still took the elixir Nathaniel provided, so that she smelt like a snake to the vampires. Nothing would get rid of her fear of being taken again, but the elixir helped, as did living at the workshop. I raced back to my mate, who was waiting patiently at the top of the stairs for me. Shall we go? I asked, and she gripped my hand hard. Yes. We hurried down the stairs, and took a cab the 3 blocks to Nathaniel's new clinic. Within hours, a mewling blood-covered perfect human being lay in Katie's exhausted arms. She's so beautiful. Katie sobbed, kissing her baby daughter's wet dark hair. The baby cried, her tiny hands flailing for purchase. I kissed Katie's sweat-covered forehead. You were amazing, sweetheart. You were, Nathaniel reiterated, taking off his gloves and throwing them in the trash. Welcome to the world, little girl. He grinned at me, reaching out to shake my hand. Congratulations, Shadow. I nodded back. Thanks, man. Katie lay back on the bed, smiling brightly. Do you want to hold her? Did I? I had no idea how to hold a baby. Let me help, Josie said, stepping between us. She wrapped the baby in a thin pink blanket and handed her to me. I ended up cradling the infant in my arms without meaning to. She just fit in my arms against my chest, like she was always meant to be there. I stared down at her. She had stopped crying and instead opened her eyes and stared up at me. "She's looking at me," I said, rocking her back and forward. Katie laughed happily and I looked at my mate. "Of course she is," Katie said. "She loves her daddy already." My nose tingled with an emotion I dared not name, and I stared down at my baby daughter. "She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Josie chuckled. "That's what all the new dads say." "I'll be back in just a moment, Katie. You rest." I carried my little girl over to the window and showed her the city. A place people had once called Bloodworld, but not anymore. Now it was a place I was happy to raise a child in with my mate. Happy birthday, beautiful girl. The end.